Okay, so you're recording live, and this is Coffee Compiler Club, and anything to do with compilers and language runtimes and typing systems and garbage collection and multi-threaded backends with JITs or compiler is all fair game. Language implementations. You're being recorded. You'll be up on YouTube generally within an hour or two after we're done. Reserve the right to moderate. Never had to do it really, and just be polite and sensible, and it's all good. And that's the end of my spiel. And now is a great time for Ludovic. Give us a 10-second, like, who are you and why are you here?
Yes, thank you, Cliff. Yeah, so I actually came to the CCC, but it was like 4 years ago. So I was kind of missing it. So I work at Rivas on RISC-V, working on the OpenJDK and having fun with architectural stuff.
So OpenJDK and architectural stuff, is that what I heard?
Yes, on the RISC-V.
Oh, in the RISC-V. Yeah, architecture on the RISC-V or OpenJDK ported to RISC-V?
OpenJDK ported to RISC-V and how to push RISC-V for Java and Go and Python and all the languages.
Get cache line 0 in there, that's done right. I'm serious. It's a thing you can only do in hardware, and it's a huge benefit. Like it's like,
oh yeah,
Zool got a third of total bandwidth chopped off by having the correct version of cache line 0, and Intel hasn't got it right yet.
There's one in RISC-V.
Yeah, but does it have the right specs?
What do you mean by right spec?
Well, can you issue them during flowing through with a busy Java application, also doing locking and allocations without having it, and have it correctly cut out the bandwidth without,
So there's no guarantee that the hardware, in the spec, it clearly outlines that there is no guarantee in the implementation of the hardware, as in it can be basically a bunch of stores, but it can be worse, but it can also be better.
Okay. So this is not done right, so it doesn't help. This is the issue. The trick here is, besides the zeroing effect that you're supposed to be there to zero the line ahead of the guy, you want it to prefetch, so you're not stalled waiting for a line to come in or waiting for cache coherency protocol to declare that you own the line properly. You want to not actually consume the read-in bandwidth. That's the main game, because it's a bandwidth game. It's not a latency game. It's only a bandwidth game, but it's a big bandwidth game. And then you have to have it not fence against locks. So whatever people do for locking on a RISC-V, usually a CAS with a fence of some combination, has to not lock or fence against the cache line 0, because people issue locks and allocations back to back, and you need to be prefetching zeros while locks are going on, and you can't be stalling the lock waiting for the prefetch 0 to come in. So those have to be in different coherency domains, and that's the trick that Intel blew. And
so that's hardware specific. That would be hardware specific. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be hardware specific.
Yeah.
I believe
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I would go to the RISC-V architecture folks, but I don't know who they are, and say, if you want to do this thing, here's the potential gain: 1/3 of all bandwidth chopped off a busy Java VM. Yes. That's a big gain of bandwidth.
I guess it's like 5 years too late for that.
Well, not for adding an architecture-specific instruction in the can be implemented or cannot be implemented. Like you said, you could have the default version be, I'm just going to throw some zeros out. But there's some way a running VM could ask the question, what is the semantics of this instruction? And if the semantics is, it does what we need it to do, then we'll use it in our code for allocation. And if it doesn't, you're done.
So I contributed to Java the fact to use this instruction. So if it's available, then it's going to be used. But obviously not all hardware. Like the strength and weakness of RISC-V is you have a set of extensions, which hardware vendor are free to implement.
Yeah.
So if it's available, then use it. If it's not, then there's no way to use it.
Well, right. So the difficulty here is I have to know that it has fencing properties against CAS, which I guess I could test at a startup of a VM. It's more difficult to test than you'd like, but it's doable. Like, many pieces of hardware will have some kind of rule on the size of prefetch ops and the size of cache line zeros that are just doing stores, which are useful where they don't cut the bandwidth out, or copy instructions of various kinds. You ask these questions at startup with a little piece of stupid code that spins through the cache, copying bits left and right, and tries to decide, what is the size of a cache line? Because that's the size of padding for avoiding, false sharing and shit like that. So you ask all these questions at startup by probing the cache, and then you throw them in as constants, and the JIT takes care of it after that. You use them after that. This one requires some sort of game where I would know things weren't in cache, issue some ZLZs, issue some locking fencing ops, and time the operation. I mean, that could be done. I think it would be difficult, but it could be done. And knowing that it's there means that you could have the allocation path. Every time you allocate an object, you issue prefetches of the appropriate matching size further out by the cache coherency protocol delay. And that gets you zeros in your L1 cache just in time as you need them, and doesn't have any read bandwidth effects, and doesn't have any stalling effects on locks and shit like that. So that was what Azul got, and what I think RISC-V has room in their architecture to implement.
Yes. So the way we implement it is basically, if you zero out a cache line, then you're obviously not going to need to fetch it before you store it back, and so that's a one-way bandwidth gain. I wasn't necessarily aware of the locking, not caching and storing, but that's a very good point.
Yeah, it's both, and also final fields. It's the same issue. Final fields typically require a fence before publication. If that fence also stalls on a prefetch of the zeros for the next allocation, then you just stall immediately for an allocation, as opposed to having it actually be a prefetch. And so you want the coherency protocol on the zeroing guy to not block on your other Java level coherency protocols. That's the trick. A lot of folks do zero. IBM's been doing a zero for years, whatever. But they stall, and so if you issue them, it's just like you issued a bunch of storage, and it didn't actually help much. I hear you. If you actually know that he's not loading, like Intel still loads the damn line. If you know he's not going to load the line, it ought to cut down the bandwidth, but you still stall for the line to become coherent, and it's a 100% guaranteed cache miss. That's the game there. And if he doesn't stall for the cache miss, like he zeroes in the line, he still has to do the coherency protocol, and you're stalling for that. But maybe that's better than going. Depends on what the coherency protocol is. I guess if you're a single core, it should be cheap. Fine, maybe it's halfway there.
I mean, there at least the instruction in there for the hardware to do the right thing. So
well, yeah, I just can't tell that's doing the right thing.
Yes.
Up front.
I mean, in the OpenJDK, you can have vendor-specific things. Like in the OpenJDK, it probes for the vendor and it sets specific things. So you can have that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I've never messed with RISC-V. There should be a thing. And what you just said was there is an instruction. It doesn't say what it does other than it's supposed to zero a line. And there are a couple ways that I think of it as that lead to more benefits or less benefits according to what it does. And so one of them is it didn't actually load the data, so it didn't burn memory bandwidth. And the other one is it didn't fence. It didn't stall for coherency if you issued a fencing op. That's what I was talking about there. And those two require, and then the third one is it's just a pile of stores. And those have like different benefits or uses. Like I would issue JIT allocation code that was different according to each of those three domains. And you get more and more benefit if you went further and further down. Like if it's just a zero, it's going to block. There's no point in the prefetch. You just issue it just on the spot.
What I was curious, because Java doesn't do it, is C2 tries to be extremely smart in terms of zeroing out memory to then the constructor initializing some fields to some constant values or some values. Have you explored, like, do you think it's worth zeroing out and then setting the values, like zeroing out, especially with this?
We played with this a bunch at Sun when I was still at Sun. I know it played with more after I left. There's a bunch of ways you play the game. One of them is just what you said, C2 doesn't issue a store. Like if you assume you're only storing zeros as your only technology, then C2 can replace stores of zeros with stores of the other initial value, right? That doesn't save you on any memory bandwidth. And the zeros on a reasonable size store buffer, or the stores on a reasonable size store buffer just stack up pretty quickly until the line becomes coherent in your cache. Then they flood into your cache. So you still have the input bandwidth, you still have the write out bandwidth when you're done, you still have to evict a line, all the normal things apply. It saved you some store ops, which x86 will execute 1 per clock. So another thing that people have tried is bulk zeroing like a cache line 0 op, but it's just like you did a bunch of stores. Then it's just fewer total operations because many fields are stored with 0. So you just stupidly, when you go to your TLab allocation, we called it millicode. It was like, I didn't necessarily inline because it was a one-shot call instruction entirely well understood by the x86. So it was a half clock cycle max cost, right? It was really cheap. That he would then go to this code that would just say, how many bytes do I need here? And he would issue the necessary CLZs to cover that many plus the leftover fraction and then come back. That one just cuts out the number of ops in the code. It's your iCache reduction. And then you stuck down the, C2 sticks down the finally non-zeros, the extra non-zeros afterwards. Again, it's a straight up reduction in op counts, fewer stores emitted. That's sort of the limit of the game. Then we tried people like, we will do bulk zeroing with like x86 string zeros up to like 8K chunks, big enough chunks that you get a lot of allocations on it. And we also tried like page zeroing, where a page was like 2 megs. But as soon as you went out of your L1, you lost the benefit because some CPU drug it into their L1, wrote it full of zeros, and wrote it back out. Then you drug it into your L1, all cache misses as known zeros, but all cache misses all the way in. Didn't save you anything. You're still stalled for the cache miss every time. So the big bulk zeroing was a lose. The modest bulk zeroing was typically not really a gain for a lot of complexity because it still had to be your core had to drag it in. Then the 8K had to not get flooded out because you had to drag it in again. So you couldn't get too big and it ate up space in your L1, but you had a faster bulk zero op maybe. It didn't pan out left or right. The Azul CLZ was the first one we saw a large gain on because we both didn't stall for the line to become coherent, and also we didn't consume the memory bandwidth. Several x86 variants like the what the hell they call it? They have a funny word for it. Non-temporal stores will avoid the read, but you still stall for the coherency.
So the Azul CLZ would, when allocating an object, you would CLZ or zero out all the cache lines that would be necessary for the object, and then you would only store the fields which make sense? Or would you still selectively say, store 0, it makes sense, store values with
yes, no, right. So you're missing the key thing here, which was the CLZ, we could use it usefully as a prefetch. So when the C2 came to allocate an object, he had zeroed lines already. They were not yet coherent because the CLZ was outside the normal Java coherency model. So he'd now issue a CLZ fence, and that made it zeroed in all other caches if it hadn't been already. So that stalled until everyone else evicted their copy of the lines. It's typically they'd already evicted, and you already knew it. So it's typically under 1 clock. It was 1 clock, well, half clock, whatever. It's dual issues. So half clock, unless something funny was going on. And then he knew it was 0, so he just threw down the non-zeros. Also, when he allocated the object, he bumped the head of the TLab allocation site, and then he went and looked how many cache lines he ate for that object, and he issued prefetches ahead, for the next however many objects. So he kept a rolling buffer of emptied cache lines that were in the middle of doing the cache coherency protocol. And depending on your allocation rate, you needed like 4 to 8 cache lines ahead that you were zeroing ahead of you, such that when you came to a fence at this cache line, the allocations that were running ahead of you had already finished the coherency. So you CLZ'd on this line, and that took, like I said, half clock, and it was done. because the hardware tracked whether or not it was known that this line was coherent or not. Like he issued a CLZ, he put zeros in the L1, he sent out the eviction notice to all the other cores, and that cache line was marked as not yet coherent. Or it got coherent when the replies came back. Then the CLZ came along and stalled the processor until the line became coherent. Typically, it was already coherent, no stall. So that meant that you still had to issue CLZs for every cache, CLZ fences for every cache line, CLZs for every cache line. These are all, half clock dual issued things. But there was no other delay and there's no memory bandwidth. Whereas if I issue a non-temporal store on an x86, and then I promptly do a final field, there's a chat going on here. I finally do a final field or locking or a volatile op, immediately block waiting, and the hardware would block for the non-temporal store to become coherent across all members. Either it did or it didn't. It either blocked or didn't make it coherent across all nodes, and I didn't have any guarantee that the line was not in another core. I only had the statistical assertion that it's not been in another core since the last GC cycle. That was sort of the rule. Like I've allocated a line that came from a T lab that was known to be freed by the garbage collector, but some other core had no reason to have evicted it unless he had things flowing through his core that he accidentally evicted it. So he might still have this line that was dead, no one pointed at it, but no one evicted it. Then a new pointer appeared and I published a pointer and he still had his old copy from the prior GC cycle. That pointer is now using the line that's already in his cache, not the one in memory, and he gets stale data. So it's a really ugly scenario, no guarantee unless you're forced coherence. And I remember one of these guys didn't do coherence everywhere, and I had to force coherence. And that already lost all the benefit. Or there was a guy who stalled. I want to say the x86 one just stalled, and maybe I'm thinking of string zero op or whatever. He just stalled, just like a pile of stores would stall. And that also lost the benefit. Yeah, but it doesn't talk anything about, I'm looking at the ARM architecture there, Matt, in the chat. Does it say anything about coherency? And if it doesn't, then you lose the stall to get it coherent. And that was what the Azul hack was doing.
But again, obviously the bandwidth is easy to understand gain. The stall, I'm thinking that in the OpenGK it does not take advantage of that in any way, like neither ARM64, neither RISC-V. So that's something we need to. And just to understand fully, for the prefetching, like the 4 to 8 cache lines ahead, you zero out when you prefetch, and you have a zero out fence when you actually
use it,
allocate the object, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens if you allocate an object which is bigger than 4 to 8 cache lines?
You went to the slower path that just started emitting zeros the hard way.
Okay.
Yeah, big objects didn't necessarily get all the gain. Yeah, you got the gain for the first 4 lines or 8 lines, and then you paid the price after that.
I mean, given that we are like with Project Lilliput, like it's reducing the header size, and I would assume a lot of object. A cache line is what, 64 bytes usually, so you can already fit
from architecture
quite a few fields. Yeah,
32 to 64 is a common numbers. Yeah,
but you can already fit quite a few fields in that. So
yeah. There are a bunch of x86s that are both 32 and 64. Both of those are fairly common in the history. And then L2 lines are commonly the same as L1 or 2 or 4x bigger. Sometimes they're somewhat bigger, sometimes not.
Okay.
All these things you can ask easily. Cache line size you can ask easily at the start of the VM anyhow. So I just go ask that question.
Ludovic, what I would be interested in, can you share the current state of RISC-V support on OpenJDK? I mean, I think it's merged into mainline, and I also saw that there is optional support for the bitmanip and vector extensions, but can you share what's the general shape, or like, do you feel comfortable building stuff against it?
Yes, so Linux RISC-V support landed in Java 19. It's very functional. I mean, I can already run a whole bunch of tests. So Reverse joined Adaptium recently, to get builds of Linux RISC-V out of Eclipse Xamarin. It's working mostly. I think it's fair to say that it's functional. It's not necessarily the highest performance there yet. So you mentioned bitmanip and vector extensions. There is support for it, but it is not enabled by default. Comes back to the fact that there is quite a lot of fragmentation today in the RISC-V ecosystem, and extension, there is no guarantee that they're available. So you need to enable them by hand, like through the -XX plus use whatever extension. I can see.
Sorry,
Yes,
couldn't you simply detect it at runtime?
Yeah, so that's why it gets funny. You technically could, but there is no official supported API in Linux to do that today. It's in the work, but it's not there yet. So the OpenJDK has no stable way to detect that. Once we have something, let me assure you that they will be the first to submit something to say, hey, like I want to detect feature at runtime, because otherwise it's a pain. Like we cannot expect people to pass magic flag to all their Java instantiation and just say, yeah, hope that it works. So I think it's fast. Also, the problem with RISC-V today is like there's a lot of talk of vectors, but there's not that many hardware that actually support it and that actually support it well, fast.
And the current version.
Yes. So, but it's coming. Like RISC-V is where ARM was 10 years ago. Like you have some dev boards, it's a pain to install because you need custom Linux kernels and bootloaders and stuff like this, but it's getting better. So
what's the high performance processor performance levels look like compared to an x86?
It does not exist today. Like,
okay. Well, I'm asking.
So the company I'm working for works on that, but it's not there yet. So
you like 1/10 an x86 or 1/4 an x86 or?
Highest performance dev boards, and again, it's dev boards, right? It's not servers that you can do. I would say like they have 2 to 4 cores, 8 to 16 gigs. So they are Atom equivalent.
Okay.
Atom x86 equivalent.
Yeah. Okay.
But like in a few years, we will see 128, 200 cores like RISC-V machines. But
okay.
Yeah.
Well, like Azul
it's
machine.
coming. Yeah, exactly. I mean, all just like ARM64 machines, right? You see Ampere Ultra Max with 128 cores, like supporting terabytes of RAM.
So fine. Okay.
So it's coming.
Well, are we like Atom style cores, 128 a pop? I mean,
probably, yeah.
We're roughly, I want to say Atom level at, we had hundreds and hundreds. On a die, 50.
But that's also why it's interesting, like industry-wide, not just RISC-V, but not everything goes into the CPU anymore. Like you have a lot of GPU, you have a lot of DPU central accelerators, and
that's true.
Workload-specific stuff.
Right.
So
right. Well, we weren't putting GPU in at anywhere, but you would have a GPU. Yeah, fine. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I guess the current problem with RISC-V is that the foundation simply has no real plan to get hardware into the hands of developers. It's even if like the Vision 5, the new one costs like $80, and it's like if I check how much trouble it is to get one, it's like, okay, now I spent more than $80 in time before I even got the board, and that's a bit disappointing.
No, yeah, I recently got a Hi5 unmatched board, but obviously I couldn't buy it because it was completely out of stock, so I had someone to sell it to me. But you basically have a motherboard with a CPU on top and some RAM attached to it, great. But then you need to buy an SSD, you need to buy a box, you need to buy a PSU, you need to buy like. So, yeah, but it's coming, right? It's not. You don't get a Mac Mini M1 yet, but at some point it's going to be there. And same thing, like the software stack is not there yet. You have support in Linux, but only the latest versions. You have support in GCC and LVM, but only the good support in the latest versions. But again, it's interesting because we have to build the app also. It's
cool.
Well, before we exit the land of cache performance, I had a question on that. Some performance numbers I couldn't quite make out. I was hoping one of you guys could shed some light. So I'm building a size of for Java and walking the graph, and like all my time goes into tracking the set of visited objects. So I've been optimizing an identity hash set and made an observation that writes into an object array, or a large object array, are way slower than writes into a large int array, like 10x more expensive. And I can't identify why that. I mean, clearly there's a cache miss going on, but why would I be having cache misses on an object array and not an int array?
You get a store barrier. You get a write barrier. You get a not, unless someone's issued a guarding write barrier, you get a write barrier, which causes a second cache miss.
So why would I have an extra write barrier with writing object references versus writing
Updated an object array? So when the garbage collector comes around to visit the young gen versus old gen pointers, he doesn't know where in the object array or anything. Anytime you do a pointer store into the general heap that might go young gen to old gen, he has to update his root set. So instead of updating his root set at the point of the write, he flips a bit in a parallel array of bits compared to pages. And usually the pages of the card mark size are like 512, shift by 9. He takes your address, he shifts it by 9, that's divided by 512. He adds a base to the card mark table, and he sets a bit in the card mark table. Usually that's too expensive, so he actually sets a byte in the card mark table. That's a store to an alternate cache line that's in parallel but scaled compared to where you wrote. If you have a big object array, you never get hits on the card mark compared to the object you're writing in. So for every cache miss in the object array, you get a second cache miss in the card mark array. Do I know that that's the total cause of your problem? No, I don't, but that is definitely a way you get more expenses there.
So I'm trying to, so one of the things I noticed is when how to even put it? If I do, instead of random writes into the object array, if I do serial writes, the performance goes back to where I want.
Now you have hits for every write in this array. The cache line is local, coherency's done, and so it's just doing storage into a privately owned. Same for the card mark, he's doing storage into privately owned. These two are like no.
And the card mark is also going to be adjacent
as well. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, you can also have a type check when you are storing a reference into a reference array.
Yeah, the type checks seem to be somewhere around 50% overhead, and this is like 10x per.
What are the types you're storing from and to?
Oh, well, the array is literally a array, Java-lang object array. So I had hoped there wouldn't be type checks, but apparently there still are.
JIT should have cleared out the type check for that. That there's a special cutout for C2 for sure. Like I know you don't need no store check on an object array.
Yeah, I might be like looking at the cost of writing a null into the array versus an object. It's like 50% more expensive to write a non-null object reference. So I assumed that was the type check.
I would say no.
No. Sorry. It was 50% more expensive to write a null than to write into the int array. Sorry, it's the 10x more expensive as soon as I write an object.
When you write a null in, he asks the question, is this guy null? Because if it's null, I skip the card mark because I can't do a shift scale on a null and have the card mark base include, because the base of pointers is far removed. So typically there's a null check as part of the card mark check.
Okay.
Which I don't know, if you're being random about it, might be missing as the thing. I would have to look at your low-level code gen or your low-level hardware pointers. The other one is that your big numbers happen if you're out of memory bandwidth for other reasons. So a check for being out of memory bandwidth.
Right.
Okay. If you're out of memory bandwidth, everything gets more expensive. All normal code, all regular.
Yeah. It was the 10x jump between writing an equivalent amount of data with an int array that was I was having trouble wrapping my head around.
So a classic way to run out of memory bandwidth, I don't know that you're there, but a classic
I'm probably not out of memory bandwidth, but I'm not sure.
Furiously allocate and have it all die immediately after allocation. And your
in this test, it's allocation free.
Okay, fine. All right. The funny one that I just said is the issue there is It doesn't show up in your standard Java profilers. Your garbage collector reports Younggen allocations being frequent and extremely cheap. You have almost no reported GC time. But because you're allocating, you're burning through your memory bandwidth for exactly the reasons we just were talking about. And now everything's just anemically slower because you're out of memory bandwidth. But if you're not allocating, that's not it.
Okay. So to understand the card mark thing, if I'm following correctly, every time I write a reference into an object array, there's going to be, for that cell in the object array, there's a corresponding cell in the card mark array that has to be marked as well.
Yeah. And then
but that should just be doubling my cache misses, right?
Yeah. And if you're rewriting to the same point in the object array a lot, then you can do guarded card marks, which will prevent repeated storing of a 0 into the card mark array over the same byte. Because the cost of a test, it's already a 0, and skip the write is cheaper than the write, which causes cache coherency for everyone else. So it's a kind of a special case optimization that's not typically done. Which, if you're doing random things, then it doesn't help.
Yeah, dude. It's because it's doing, it's a hash. At the end of the day, it's a hash set. So very, very random.
What kind of hash set is it?
So I started with identity hash map and was turning it into an identity set. And
But
it's
the JDK identity hash map.
Yeah, and there's no remove. So I was like optimizing, but then this particular one, when I randomly say, well, what if I just like make it kind of a lossy set and it's just storing identity hash codes, but no, not the object references. And like, wow, that's way, way, way faster. And then even backfilling and having a secondary array of objects so that I was never wrong is still way, way, way faster than identity hash map. I think I come out like 5 or 6 times faster. Yeah, I was like, okay, this is really cool, but I don't like that I can't explain why it's fast.
Try non-blocking hash map and concurrent hash map. And just because they have different patterns of how things hit in your caches, and see if that makes a difference. Because if you're into funny games like bad hash codes, so you're endlessly doing probe shit.
Well, it's all identity hash codes, so they're good. And I'm looking to size optimize it too, because it's storing huge object graphs. So like there can't be a map component here. I need to remove the value. But it would still be interesting to see how identity or concurrent hash map does.
The value component costs you a pointer, but you just point to an empty object, the same empty object or an empty string or whatever.
No, yeah, but that I'm worried about the cost of that. You're
pointer. That's too much already.
I'm walking huge object graphs. So
well, define huge, because I've done huge before. I don't know what.
Everything's relative, but the graphs are hundreds of megabytes. So my array ends up being tens of megabytes.
Okay, yeah, fine. I would claim not so huge. I'm sorry.
I know everything's relative.
I mean, you're almost in L3 land.
Yeah, but there will be way too many threads doing this concurrently as well.
Well, then you grab
on their own sets.
But grab not in the shared hash table or their own hash table.
No. Everyone has their own hash table, right? Just what they're walking.
Then you could in fact be out of memory bandwidth.
Yeah. So far the tests I've been doing are single threaded, but in production there would be many threads doing their own isolated
classic GC issue is that he randomly walks a random large heap, and therefore everything's a cache miss, and he burns memory bandwidth like there's no tomorrow. And he's running side by side by mutators, and he's eating all the memory bandwidth. So this sounds like you're doing that kind of behavior, randomly walking a large object graph. Everyone's cache missing furiously. You're out of memory bandwidth. I don't know, but you have symptoms of being out of memory bandwidth.
Yeah. So in my test, I wouldn't think I am, because there I'm dealing with a million objects, and like that's all going to fit in my L2. But in the real world, yeah.
How big are the objects?
I'm just
tiny
juggling object, right? In my test. It was at the larger scale I can see that being a problem. And it'll be walking the arbitrary graph is going to be tons of misses.
Yeah, well, you'll still be missing from your, well, you'll fault all of the graph from memory to L2. But it, yeah, sounds like it ought to fit in L2. Million times whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that's just my test set. The real world is going to be bigger.
Well, I was wondering why your test set was showing you symptoms of being
right. So yeah, the card mark question. If that would also fit, that should also comfortably fit in my L2, I would think.
Well, right. It's just everything's a doubling, and you do twice as much, and you know, technically you could be out of L1 to L2 bandwidth. I don't know. That seems less likely. Can happen. Or you're in L3 and not L2, and you're barely fitting.
Right.
What's your processor running on? You're running on a standard.
This is on an ARM, on an M1 Max.
Oh, on M1 Max. I don't know. Like x86 tried hard at some point to get more bandwidth, and they got a little further along, but I have no idea what the ARM bandwidth is like.
The M1 bandwidth is supposed to be insane.
Okay.
But that might be bandwidth to memory.
What's the associativity? Is it a 4-way or 8-way?
I have no idea.
No idea.
I should
This
know.
is a hardware perf counter question, or look at the code and maybe I can puzzle it out thing, but yeah. Still smells like out of bandwidth if it's card marks or not the card marks.
Well, for what it's worth, so I was testing different Java versions as well, and 11 through 19. And in 19, it gets way better until I increase to 8 million objects, and then it's bad again.
Oh, interesting. Well, wait, what's the size of your objects?
These are just Java-lang object, right?
No,
12
4
byte
byte pointers compressed?
4 byte, yeah, running compressed. And same deal if I run uncompressed, just everything doubles.
And the 19 is still the same?
So 19
didn't
showed
put
good
compressed on?
performance. Like
I'm asking
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just asking that you didn't double the size of your pointers between one of the versions and another, but it sounds like
No, I ran compressed everywhere, and then I was also testing 11 with uncompressed just to see what the difference was.
Okay.
So uncompressed everywhere, everything looks identical 11 through 18, and then in 19, like performance gets much better. And then I went from 1 million objects to 8 million objects, and I get the same pattern as I had before, where random stores of objects cost 10x their equivalent of random stores of ints.
Yeah,
but I got to go to 8 million before that happened. Whatever, maybe it would have happened to 2 million.
Still smells like bandwidth. So you're running hot code that's small, break it in a debugger and look at the code. Like
learn to go that deep.
Yeah,
I'll be reading the reading the ARM assembly, right?
Right. Like if it's all one piece of hot code that you're running over and over and over again, 99.9% of the time you ask DDP to halt the process, you're in the hot loop.
There's not much. Yeah, in Java, this is 2 lines of code. So how bad could the assembly be?
You don't necessarily have to read all the code. You could diff the int versus the object, for example.
I'm sorry.
And see what it's. You could diff it between the int version and the object version to see what's different.
Yeah, run the int version, run the object version, and get the assembly for them both. Stretch yourself either side where you're broken, so you get a little lead in and a little back edge behavior, and then we'll take a look. That was me doing performance when I couldn't figure it out otherwise. I did that all the time.
On Linux, I have found JMH with the perf ISM provider to be quite amazing for that. It gives you the dump of the assembly and the count, the number of time basically each instruction was executed, and it's all just JMH, so Java code that
the only time I regret running on a Mac, although it's actually running in Linux virtualized on the Mac, but I don't think I can get hardware performance counters out of that either.
I think you can, because it's not going to rely on hardware counters. It's just going to rely on the kernel, so in that case Linux, just pounding every X CPU cycles. So
random stack crawl. Yeah,
I will try that.
I said the Zool collector, the Zool VM will give you the Zing random stack crawl, same kind of stuff, but JMH is probably the easier way to set up and go.
Did you see Azul change names again? So Zing is, I guess, up for grabs.
All right. I never liked Zing anyhow. Fine.
Zing is now Platform Prime.
Platform.
And with platform core. Yeah, it happened a while, maybe like a year ago, maybe more.
I don't know. I did a cool profiling hack, and the management at Azul said it's not open, it's not free like everything else in Java. We're going to charge for it. You bastards. Fine. Nothing to do with you, Arthur. I'm just talking about, I get it,
Well, you can add it to AA.
Exactly. Oh yeah, it's there. I mean, in my head. 2 weeks in Europe having fun, looking at gorgeous countryside, and walking around Venice, and I kind of didn't get any progress on overloads. But I came back kind of refreshed, so I made some progress this week on overloads. So that was good.
I think stepping away from a computer for a bit's a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, Rome is as epic as ever. I mean, the Romans did some totally fuck-ass amazing shit. And Venice is like, it's romantic as you can get. You just wander around and there's a new exciting stupid thing in every little nook and cranny and corner. So we had a great time. And then I taught class at with memory bandwidth as the main thing at Fliss, in an Italian castle up on a hillside overlooking this countryside. It's just really gorgeous. So I had a great time. And I can talk more fun examples of memory bandwidth, but they're not what your problem is, Mark.
Yeah, I feel like most of the programmers I talk to never think about memory bandwidth at all. And it's like, but that's where all the performance is.
That's where all the numbers are. That's right. That's what I had. I had a whole bunch of like young grad students, and I said, okay, here's a 3.5 gig file. It's a little bit bigger than your memory, so you're going to have to suck memory bandwidth. Process this file. Go count, group by, and sort a few dozen little things. Pretty small shit. And then then I start talking memory bandwidth at them, and we remove all allocations slowly, piece by piece, and the code gets more than 10x faster when we're done by removing allocations. And that's all we did. Remove allocations. Oh, 10x speed up. That's pretty good. So that was an eye opener for those guys.
Was it the cache pollution or was it GC?
Well, there you go. See, you stepped into my trap.
Happily.
Every time. So what's the cost of an allocation? Everyone knows the cost of allocation is, right? It's a bump pointer on a T-lab that rarely misses. x86 does it in one clock cycle, plus a 100% hard guarantee that you have a cache miss of the line you just allocated. So it's all memory bandwidth. You run out of memory bandwidth. So in this example here, it's you read in 3 gigs. Every time you read it in, you do the original implementation is you do a buffer read or read line that takes 1 byte of network, OS disk data, makes it 2 bytes of string, plus a header. And then, so that's, 3 gigs became 6.5 or whatever, 7 gigs, plus the 3, you're up to 10 gigs you have to eat. Then you do a spring split, that doubles again, plus a bunch of headers, because you know a bunch of short strings and an array of strings, and that gives you another, 2.5x on top of that. And it goes to 1 byte of real data, goes to about 14.5 bytes of junk data for allocation. And the constant streaming in of empty lines to be filled into strings and then writing them out because they're dirty, but you're dead and the hardware doesn't know, means that you string through your caches repeatedly and it just floods your caches with these junk data. So you're out of bandwidth, and also your caches are constantly wiped clean. And so every time you miss in your cache, you have to go to memory, but you're waiting your turn for the piles and piles of string data coming and going. And so all cache misses are slow and everything's cache missing all the time. And that sounds like what Mark's up against. All things are slow and he's cache missing all the time. That's my red flag, except I get it by garbage collection, by allocation, not garbage, by allocation. GC costs are totally minimal in this scenario because it's all young gen instantly DAD. You get a high volume of very, very cheap young gen microsecond level allocation GC pauses that mean nothing in the overall runtime. But you're out of bandwidth, and that's the 10x speed up. So in Mark's case, no allocation. So why are you out of bandwidth? That's what I've been puzzling out. I claim it smells like you're just doing random probes in a large data set, and they're actually all missing despite your claim they fit in your L2. And that's what the apparent behavior is.
They have to fit in my L2. But
yeah, I understand. But the apparent behavior is they're not, and I don't get it, right? the second array of card marks are, divide by 512, so they don't add a whole lot of size. So if your main set fits in L2, card marks should too.
Yeah. Well, time to look at assembly.
I think so. I think you do that and make sure there's no stupids going on in the code. And if there's no stupids going on in the code, then you're down to hardware perf counters. And I don't know what the ARM cost model looks like. So on an x86, all these things, out of order, reorder, buffer, blah, 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 they all zoom through. There are some versions of cheaper chips where you can't sustain more than X many reads or writes outstanding, and you run out of like store buffer, or you run out of a load store unit consumption. And that's why it slows down suddenly, or he gets false hazards because you're constantly spinning between loads and stores, and because you're loading the data and you're storing a card mark or whatever. I mean, I don't know where the cost model goes on an ARM when you have sort of this kind of shit. So
yeah, I think the real clue is when I switch to, like, the whole test is operating on a single array, and it's read from a random slot, right? And write that same value back to a random slot. But if I switch it to read from random and then write serially forward, so, read random, write 0, read random, write 1, then it's fast again.
I claim that smells like bandwidth. It's caching or bandwidth. So well, okay. So if the ARM has a small store buffer and you do sequential stores, then they go into store buffer in order, ding, 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 and then the cache line appears for it. He floods them into the cache, store buffer wipes, and you go again, and he pipelines it well. If he has a random writes in a small store buffer, he goes ding, 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 store buffer full. He can't bring a line per byte in the cache. So he has to be in the L1 now, not your L2. So to evict an element out of the store buffer, he has to have a line in his L1, but he's only getting 1 for 1. So one store gets one write from 2 to 1, L2 to L1, and then the store buffer clears and you're not stalling on the store buffer and the next store can go. So if your store buffer is too small, he can't pipeline this shit deep enough, and he can't keep up with the rate from L2 to L1 before he backs the store buffer up.
Right. And then going back to the int versus object, it's just the card mark is doubling that. So I might just be slipping over the tipping point.
Right. And right.
Okay.
I don't know. I know x86 has a huge store buffer on purpose because that's part of their schmick for doing like predictive or whatever, speculative execution. All those stores pile up on the store buffer and then he fails, so he has to abort. He just writes out the store buffer and goes again, but he needs to consume a large count of stores until the speculation ends. So he has to wait for the missing iCache or a Bcache or the line command and resolve the flags on the test and say, it didn't actually fail on me. So all these writes are now good, and he releases them out of the store buffer into the cache. But he wants a big store buffer to go, wildly out of order. I don't know. Actually, well, this should be an ARM question, I think.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to run this on Intel. It's funny, like all of a sudden, all my good equipment is ARM based, which, I was always wanting to play with some ARM stuff years ago, and now it's all ARM. To find Intel somewhere.
Why did I get
tipping points?
Okay, so ARM, what'd you call it, Max 5 or something?
No, it's Apple's M1 Max, MAX.
Okay.
This is very confusing for me. I just want to let everybody know.
Why?
Because
we're talking about how fast Max is.
Every time someone says Max, then like someone's.
Max, do you use a Mac? And if so, did you get the
right
M1
now,
Mac?
I'm using my fifth work computer is a Mac, just to try it out, just to see what the M1 is like. But mostly I use like a shitty little ThinkPad.
Okay, so for the rest of the conversation,
be glad your parents didn't name you that.
Sorry?
We're saying be glad your parents didn't name you that.
Shitty little ThinkPad, yes.
Yeah.
That's just my nickname. Actually, my nickname in college was Emacs, and that's why my username at work is Emacs. Because I used Emacs at that point. So
that
I was
seems like that could backfire.
It does. Every time someone says Emacs in like an IRC channel when they're debugging something, I get a notification. So I'm just like, and I use Vim now. So like everybody was like, oh, great Unix name. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have like a init.el to show you. Not anymore.
But I will say ARMs do seem to be showing up. I had a hard time trying to get the AA to run on the Raspberry Pi. It was just like, wait, what version of the JVM are you using?
Yeah, I'm reading somebody's Y Combinator comments on the M1, and he might not have enough bandwidth between L1 and L2 for your case, Mark. I don't have official numbers or anything.
Can you drop that in the chat?
Yeah. It's kind of a, you know, I did a random Google search for the size of the store buffer and I got a near miss. So it wasn't what I was looking for, but it was some information comparing a big x86 to the Apple M1. And they're claiming a giant reorder buffer, and then somewhere deeper down, loads and stores to the Intel Skylake Zen to L2 can be issued once per clock. And then there's no comment, which he's contrasting it to M1. So I'm guessing, and then M1 claims this is a larger L1. So I'm thinking the contrast is in there because the M1 cannot issue loads and stores to the L2 at 1 per clock. And so if you fit an L2 in your random access, then you're out of bandwidth between L1 and L2. Don't know. And running an x86 might give you another data point.
So let's see, if with the, I don't want to take the whole call, but with the card mark thing, if I cut my object array in half and do 500,000, right? So then I'm hitting half the card marks as well. Then would you expect I should get equivalent performance to the 1 million entry int array?
I don't know where the breakpoint is, but as you continuously shrink, I would claim that you would fit more and more into your L1.
Right. If I shrink at some point, it'll definitely all of a sudden get better. But I'm trying to think like how to verify that it's the double writes because of the card mark. So if I'm going to use literally twice the bandwidth because of card mark, well, if I force myself to cut things in half, then should I, or half-ish?
Throw a GC flag. If you go look up one of the XX flags of yore, I don't know if they're still live, but there were XX flags of yore that you get rid of card marks. And of course, you can't run a generational collector, so you have to go like the original serial collector.
Don't need a collector.
Right.
Yeah.
So you run the original serial collector, no card marks. The one generation only. And there are debug flags that would let you turn off card marks for performance testing, but as soon as you ran a generational collection, you died. Right, so this is run until you ran out of memory, and then at the next allocation cycle, you know, you're dead. But you could test the no card mark cost. And then there had been debug flags that let you do guarded card marks, but if you're doing all things at random, they're probably not helpful. A little bit helpful.
And what's the there's a GC now that's like no GC, right? It's just endlessly allocates, which I imagine would.
I don't know, but that would be what you're looking for as a speed run test.
Cool. I will find that.
Try a Neoverse core. What is a Neoverse core?
So most of the cloud, if you can run this in a cloud, most clouds that have ARM are going to have some CPU with Neoverse core. And Neoverse core happens to have pretty good performance counters for memory profiling. So if you need to exactly track where is it getting lost, is it L1 cache, is it L2 cache? Maybe it's the number of the MSHRs or something like this. They also have a pretty good performance analysis guide that actually walks you through those counters and tells you what is available. So I would run that and the perf mem option, because those counters should be virtualized, which means that even if you run on a machine in the cloud, you should have access to those performance counters using Linux perf.
I had one other thing that I just remembered. You said it changed big time between Java 19 and Java 18.
Yes.
Okay, almost surely there has to be like JITted code change. I don't know what else that would be between the two. So then that says it's even more important to look at the assembly, because assembly between 18 and 19 should have a diff that says, and here's the big gain. And then you go to 8 megs and suddenly you definitely don't fit in one or the other, some cache bandwidth thing definitely loses out. Now you're toast.
Great. I found that it's epsilon GC, it's the no GC GC. So I'm running now with that. Well, in 1 minute.
We'll wait.
Yeah, we can all sit here and just stare at each other for another 40 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't even considered like I'm like, there's no GC going on in this test. There's no reason to even think about the collector, but right. Card mark makes some sense.
Card marks for generations. Azul collector does card marks for generations too. But the hardware had a filtering card mark. That was a easy cheesy peasy piece of hardware hack to cut exactly the case out where you rewrite what they call a popular object, whatever. You're continuously slamming some particular object pointer down or into some particular object, continuously slamming down, and then you can skip the second write of a 0 over a 0.
So results are in, and that made the performance as expected. So I guess that kind of, well, it says it's definitely GC and most likely card mark.
There you go.
So
that's kind of out of bandwidth. Somewhere in the universe you're out of bandwidth because the card mark otherwise should disappear into the store buffer heaven. So I claim you're out of bandwidth.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm trying to decide, like, so I was able to, I love when like one of these things comes up, like this is random, it doesn't make sense, but it's fast. Let me figure out how to exploit it.
Yeah.
Right. So now I have a hash set implementation that exploits it. That's really fast, but is it actually real world useful? And I suppose it is if I'm scanning stupidly big object graphs. Like I am going to run out of bandwidth.
Let's say if you're out of bandwidth on one core, you're going to be out of bandwidth on all future cores. So if it's actually out of memory bandwidth, then all your extra cores will not be helping.
Right.
That's
in terms of like, is it worth?
Right.
Like, yes. Right. Well, one of the things I'm trying to do is answer the question: is it feasible to use this to walk the graph at runtime periodically? And the answer may simply be no.
It technically doesn't stop the mutators, but it eats all their bandwidth, and they'll just grind to a halt until you're done. Then they'll pick up speed again. Yeah.
Yeah. Fun.
So the other one, you can walk it slowly. Slow down your walk. Oh, all right. See you later, Arthur.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'm more like trying to slip this in as part of just normal application threads. Like once in a while I do it and I sample how long it takes and then I back off. So I'm trying to keep it that I'm using less than 1% of the thread's execution time doing this stuff.
And the hack done by Parallel GC, and I guess probably a lot of folks afterwards, your walk is random at the moment. He keeps a set of like the 8 top things in his work list to go walk next things, and he sorts them by what cache lines he's visited recently in an effort to reuse cache lines to get another object on the same line. So common allocation pattern is I make an object and I point to the next object or just previous pointer, right? So the pointers are all near each other in caches because they got allocated near each other in time. So when you do a GC walk and you have a lot of choices about what to go walk next, you walk a pointer that you've just walked recently or nearby in the caches in an effort to hit the cache for the next object as well.
Right, but I don't have the fidelity in Java to know that, right? So it's just kind of depth or breadth first.
You don't get the you don't have the cache, you don't have the physical address of the object.
No.
You have the identity hash map of the object or whatever, the system hash
Yeah,
map.
and that's apparently that's just a random number now. It's not based on the address.
Caches, and that's a lousy cache code in general. So now it's pretty random. Suck. There you go. You need a cast object to int. Never cast it the other way. Just want to cast the object pointing to an int or a long or whatever.
Yeah, I mean there'd be no harm. Give me the address of an object. I can't do anything with it.
Right, except optimize walking. This is one of these side channel attacks for Spectrum Meltdown. You get a timing attack based on knowing cache line alignment, but I don't know how to turn into one, but I'm sure you can.
Right.
But I would give it to you, no problem.
I'll include it in AA.
All right, fine. Are we done with this conversation here?
Yes. So thank you.
So when I joined, it sounded like you and Yorick were talking about debugging, like getting debugging information through to the like
Yeah,
through
he's thinking
advanced
his-
optimization and stuff.
Yeah, his JIT or his ahead of time compiler was going to read his language and emit C code with some kind of debug info. He's trying to figure out.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too, and I was wondering if you've thought about how to have code that's been optimized through CF nodes be debuggable afterwards.
I do it all the time. Exactly, Java gives you perfect debugging and also strong optimization. and there's 1 or 2 hat tricks, and they're not too many. So I only allow the program to be stopped at a safe point. And a safe point is a thing that comes around roughly every 1,000 clock cycles, something like that. It's reasonably quick, but not so quick that it screws up optimization. At a safe point, which happens to also typically be a GC point, but they don't have to be, I have a complete mapping from machine registers and stack spills to the Java architected machine state, the JVM machine state. So I can tell you what bytecode number and what Java registers and whatever. And there's a magic trick called de-optimization that allows you to convert from the JITted code to an interpreted state. So if you're running hot optimized Java code and you say, stop me in the debugger, he issues a safe point request. The code runs forward to the next safe point, stops however it's caught. There's a couple ways you can stop it. He then rewrites the stack from the JITted layout to an interpreter, and you're now in the interpreter. And the interpreter has full connections to the debugger, and the JVM will let you step in the interpreter, single step, and read all the layout of everything. So the cost is you have to maintain state that is visible to the interpreter, but not actually use it. So the JIT will maintain some state of things that might otherwise be dead so that you can stop and debug. And when you run out of registers, he spills that shit to the stack because it's not going to be read by anybody in the JITted code, typically runs through. So it's actually fairly cheap. You dial the expense by how long you want to have these safe points apart, and you dial the delay for garbage collection by how long you want to have these safe points apart. So there's a little tension.
Right. So you basically just skip the problem. Like you basically say, it sucks to try and debug JITted code. So we have a nice exit path and we can start debugging an interpreted code.
Yeah, this is the difference between Mark's problem of he's trying to get performance numbers out of a tight piece of assembly that he can't see, and a standard Java developer who's just wanting to say, what is the Java model state here, right?
Yeah.
So I give him the Java model state directly, but I run full speed when he's not asking for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a, I have something more like his problem where I don't really want to have, I want to be able to debug the optimized code and
performance debug. Like
I want to be able to capture states over time and then look at how they've unfolded and tie that back to source code so I can make sense of it.
Okay, so I still want to distinguish here between performance debugging and correctness debugging.
Yeah, so I'm mostly worried about correctness debugging for myself for now, but then I was thinking about how I can use that also for users for performance debugging so we can do the same system.
Okay, so I can tell you what I did in the past, and this is the Azul debugger thing, which was at the time the code gets emitted, the compiler knows the mapping from, so at safe points, of course, it's perfect. In between, he has a wide range tracking, but he can't track it perfect because things are been optimized, so there's no one-to-one mapping to any bytecode, anything.
Yeah.
He knows offsets, he knows bases of objects, the classes, the compiled knowledge of the base of the class. So at every point that you had a register holding a pointer, he could tell you the object's class, not the compiled class. So it could be a subclass of that.
Yeah.
And every offset, he would know this was a field of the base pointer and what the field name was. So when I went to do a disassembly, so I would give you the disassembly with hardware perf counters on each instruction, perfect at safe points, and they would be marked and give you the exact shit. In between, I would tell you the pointer is this class and the offset means it's this register. So the disassembly would say, RX plus 16 / comment, doubling animal dot legs or whatever the fuck I'm, doing there, right?
Yeah.
And it would give you that kind of stuff going around to help you diagnose where you were. And then from the perfect points, you had mapping to the Java code. So you would get a pointer to an inline stack tree of this guy with 3 lines on either side, inline here with 3 lines, inline here, 3 lines. It would spew out, and you kind of could sort out where the hell you were with the thing. But I did not make a single step in the debugger because that's not the Java spec in any way. And I did not do perfect because there was no perfect possible, because exactly the case of, like, there would be times where I deleted shit that was otherwise would be live because at the next save point it would have died, so it'd be dead already and you couldn't pass. What is variable J? Well, variable J was, doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah. So I've been thinking about this a bit. I have a kind of idea of, so one of the differences that I've done is in the so I'm doing the sea of nodes, but I'm doing it in an actual like graph system, right? So it's an in-memory kind of graph, explicit graph, right? So I'm building that up, but it means I can have a lot of other edge types. And so I can kind of have any number of arbitrary edge types. So it occurred to me the other day to just, when I'm ingesting the graph and before I do any optimization, put an edge from something that points to the source code location, like put a node in the graph that represents every source code location in the AST.
Yeah.
And then tie that to the nodes that are created from it. And then as I'm optimizing the graph, some nodes disappear and whatnot, and those are just lines of code that we're not bothering to use. And sometimes many source nodes would point to the same place. But and I have a little picture of this if you want. I always draw out these little graphs if you want.
Right. I draw them all the time. So
that's what we do for our JIT. We have every node has a bytecode offset and a link to a code. If it can deopt, a link to a code pointer, and then that's a unique reference to like where it is in the source code.
Here, let me put this on the other screen.
So in the safe point land for Java, I put a node in the graph called a safe point node, and it had a pointer to every Java architected state. And then the optimizer got to optimize all the Java architected state, except you had to keep it alive for the safe point. But of course, keeping it alive just means that it didn't die, but he could schedule it wherever he wanted and spill it to the stack wherever he wanted. And he had all the brains to know to spill shit eagerly that was only being used for safe points and the like. Safe point was basically a extremely low frequency branch to a subroutine call that ate all Java architected state and generally returned all architected state if you're going to allow debugging on it. If you're going to never come back from the debugger, like you go to the interpreter and then you have to rejit. If somebody changes a variable, you'd have to rejit.
So this is sort of like an impressionistic view of how it would go in. There might be a bit more
scale because I have a tiny corner.
Oh, you only wait, let me reshare maybe if something went wrong. Sorry, something went wrong. There we go. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, so so this is sort of an impressionistic view of, I think we looked at this sample program before, but then here are all the sort of source code locations, and here it is mapped to the graph. And then later, once it's sort of placed and optimized, this could, so when I'm looking through the debugger, my thinking is that I can walk through the source code, in order, and then just grab the state from different times and sort of reconstruct what it should be if it wasn't optimized.
No, in general, you don't get a perfect mapping without fairly expensive maintenance of stuff that you won't look at. Like I said, this example is pretty small, but if I give you a bigger one and you had to maintain all that state, that's a lot of it. The safe point hack lets you only maintain that state every, like I said, every 1,000 ops or something stupid, and once per loops, or there's a hack for making the loop thing have a finite limit.
Maybe this was compatible with the safe point thing, because then anything that's pointing too far back just points to a safe point.
Right, as I say, it's pretty close. I would throw in a safe point in the body of the loop, since I don't know its trip count,
Yeah.
Like if I know it's a finite small trip count, like here, the compiler would actually pick it up. It's 1 to 10. He wouldn't save point it. But if I don't know the trip count of the loop, you get 1. If the loop's too small, I unroll and jam on the loop, so you don't get infinite save point overheads in the loop.
Yeah.
And you have to have 1 for every call path. So if the function has a 0 trip count test, and you could skip and just come in and go out, you don't know that the function itself is being called in a hot loop 1 layer up that never has a save point, because every call is typically a save point. So you have to include a save point. For the C2 Java version of the world, the rule is, roughly statistically speaking, every 1,000 ops and hard limits at some number beyond that, 10,000 hard limit. Okay.
Yeah.
That meant that every function call, every path through every function had to have a save point somewhere. You could not walk a function and get in and out without having a save point.
Right. And so so stuff that's dead you might still be calculating it just to build the save point.
And so you want to make sure that cost of that dead stuff is low. So for tiny loops like this, I would do enroll and jam.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for larger loops, after you unroll a few times, save point for, body of the loop that's been unrolled 8x has already got, 10 things from here and 10 from there and 10 from there. It's got 30, 40, 50 ops, and a save point's probably pretty cheap. The loop invariant pieces are free, but it's what you had to do per loop iteration.
Yeah.
So like there's an index variable I that was kept alive for whatever reason, and you unrolled by 8 and I bumps by 8, but then it's kept alive in a register with a bump by 8. Well, a bump by 8 is pretty cheap.
Yeah.
There were places where I could get away with doing a reverse calculation to compute I from a base offset, like strength reduction happens in simple striding loops over arrays. Strength reduction definitely happens.
Yeah.
Followed by I can reverse to get the index variable by doing reverse math, and that would just go off onto this slow path of the save point. Like save point, like I said, would put in as a low frequency branch to a call that takes all things, and if it doesn't return, then it wouldn't have any return path. It wouldn't return any dead call, right? Okay, that means that it has no output that fusses with your code quality in the loop, and all these unwind calculations to take the base minus the strength reduced pointer to get the index variable can happen in the exit path. So again, they don't fuss with the body of the loop. And the branch out is no instructions. It's just a point in the graph. It's a line in the sand.
Right. Interesting.
So you can drop the cost of a safe point pretty low, and I did, not perfect, but I got it low enough that it's much less than 1%, 10th of a percent, and then no one can measure it anyhow. They can't see it, they can't measure it, they don't care.
Yeah. I think I was looking at the Graal IR papers the other day, and they seem like they've sort of formalized safe points into the structure of the sea of nodes that they use somehow. I'm not sure.
My safe point node is a standard node in the graph, like any other node. In fact, call node derives from safe point node. Safe point node is a base class, and call nodes after it.
Okay, interesting.
So all function calls are also safe points.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is a shorter topic than cache coherence, I guess, but I think it's. Yeah. Okay. I'll have to think about that. I feel like I'm on the right track, but maybe.
No, I think you are. Yeah.
So, I mean, I have another. Oh, so I have a couple of things. So I gave that talk the other day. I don't know if any of you saw that, but it was in the last one. So there's a video recording of it now, and I thought it went pretty well. So it's on this pattern matching thing that I built that I am using to do all the stuff.
All the pattern match things. Yeah, it's just your closure thing going on.
It was on the last Coffee Cup. Sorry.
Yeah, I mentioned that I was
Club or so. Where was the talk?
It was well, I did it from home, but it was for this group called London Closurians.
All right.
Just a video thing. Yeah, and it's like a couple dozen people sort of live, and similar scale of this actually, but it's
yeah.
So
cool.
Anyway, so the other thing that I've been thinking about is how to deal with state in
deal with state?
Yeah, so actually I've got a couple of pictures. So
I can tell you what I do, but you go first. But
yeah, okay. So I'll show you what the like kind of challenges for me. So this is like a kind of high level picture from one of our like slide decks that we gave ages ago about our architecture. And there's a bunch of
I have only on my screen, I have the picture of the simple dumb loop that just does a little bit of math and no memory references.
Oh, it's funny. My screen sharing paused again. I don't know why. Okay, let me reshare. Okay, so all right. So can you see it now?
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
live and just scaled up.
Yeah. Okay. So this is our chip architecture at a very high level, and each of these rows has 64 PEs. So one of the interesting things is, there's a bunch of state happening in each of these PEs, but it's a SIMD thing, so they don't really, each row of them, everything's running together. But sometimes I can turn on and off row masks so that some of the rows are working and others are not. And so it really kind of fragments my like state situation. I mean, I guess, one option is that I have sort of one high level state and I just say states changed anywhere, but I was trying to do better than that.
Yeah, I have a better than that answer, but I don't know if it fits your model.
Yeah.
I have a better than that answer for Java.
Yeah.
It also goes for C and, C-like languages.
Yeah. So I have this like example of straight line code. Actually, I think these are both the same. Sorry, this is a lot of nodes here.
It's live and moving as you're dragging around.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a function doing straight line code. And I think it's clearer split up into kind of columns. But I've got, state. My thinking was to do a separate state object for like everything, which means I'll have quite a few of them. So every time I've got a variable that's a global, it ends up a state, or if it's an object. And then also PE, like sort of array states become states as well.
Yeah.
And so, some of these are just read, I load stuff and whatever, but some of them actually mutate. And then I've got, this is like one of the states inside the array. I sort of move something into it, it becomes a new version of the state, and then that's eventually returned by the function together with, the actual result. And this state of the FIFO tail is also changed in the course of the function, so it's also returned. And so
let me pull up. I gave this talk a couple months ago here, but I added a bunch of slides you guys haven't seen about memory.
Sure.
So if I can go drag it up here, I'll show you what Java does, which is very similar to what you're talking about. Yes. Okay, let's do this one. I'm gonna. Is that okay? Are you ready to?
Oh yeah, I just unshared. Yeah.
Share this guy. Share. People see that now?
Yeah.
Fine. Okay, so you've all seen this slide. I'm just saying, hey, SSA-based memory, big value. Fine. I'm going to move on pretty quick here. Peephole rules, just the same. Precision is based on alias information. This is the key thing. It's equivalence class aliasing is usually more precise. And what you're talking about is headed straight for equivalence class aliasing. And I think that you're doing exactly the same things. I was going to show you, step through what I can and can't do with equivalence class. So here's some equivalence classes. I'm showing animals. This is, like I said, this is old slides. New slides show up pretty quick here, where if I know that you're not aliased, you belong in a class. And if you may alias, you always alias, and you go in the always class. So it's either never or always. There's no may alias questions. And the difference there is that a never and always can be represented directly in the graph and optimized directly in the graph and preserves alias information directly in the graph. And let's go look at that. So somebody says, hey, I have an array loop. I'm just going to sum the elements in the array with a syntactic sugar for loop, which turns into a new iterator that's being bumped as it walks through the array. So very straightforward. I have just two aliases here. I have the iterator and the array itself. So here's a sea of nodes version of a control flow graph. There's a start memory, which is in red. There's a pointers to the array base. And then I put a loop in the control flow graph so you can just see how that, and then I'm going to hide it because it's too complicated. So then there's now just looking at the data flow, I'm taking the pointer of the array at the top, somewhere here in the middle. Can you guys see my mouse move?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
okay.
see.
Okay, so there's some array math I'm not exploding to keep the graph simple that just says, get the iterator's X offset, do some array math, get a pointer to the guy, load the value, and bump it to my sum in a loop, right? And then there's a little more complicated one where I'm looking at memory here. So there's some memory fee if I have one alias class only, which is like the bad answer. And I load the iterator from the iterator's offset of +8 from the base of the iterator, and I increment it, that's X++, and I store it. I also load the array length and range check. I also load the array element and then go to the sum loop, which I'm not showing at the moment. And here I have a loop of red, which is all of memory. And because it's being written, I have aliasing with these two loads. That's not good. And I'm going to break up memory into a bunch of memory classes. So here's the whole graph together. Don't bother to look at it. It's a horrible eye chart. That's why I didn't do it. So skip it. All right, go back to this guy. And the comments on the left are, iter +8, the offset of the X field, never aliases with any of the int array elements. And the array +8, which is the length, never aliases with anything at 12 and further, because that's the well-known Java layout of array length versus the array body. So I'll break up my memory at the top here into 3 memory classes. And just what you said, I have one for every interesting alias class, equivalence class. Every unique thing is its own memory. And I haven't broken it down into the middle yet, but I'm going to do it in the next slide. So in this breakup, I have the one loop carries the ++ on the X++ iteration. There is a fee was put in because when I parsed the code, I put a fee in, but it's junk fee because there were no writes to the array length and to the elements. So there's 2 junk fees. So I'm just going to people and get rid of them. And then I do a re-way out, so topological shuffle, but no graph edge change. So the length comes out. The body here has to do the math from the index, which is changing every iteration. So this load is stuck in the loop. And then there's the load in the store for that guy. And then I do some people optimizations after that. I'm going to push a load up through the fee, and that just swaps the load in the fee. And you get 2 loads and 2 fees. And the plus now comes off the loaded fee, and the loaded fee is also used as index math. And then there's the memory store for the store, and I'm going to shuffle this a little bit to the layout, but no edge change, just move nodes like this. It's a little clearer. And you can see I have a repeated store. Here's a store in a tight loop. I'm just storing the iterator now. So that people, what it let me do is not load, increment, store in the loop. I'm now incrementing and storing in the loop. So the loop has a preload of the iterator that's then used to do the math for the array load and a continuous +1 store. And now from here, I can change the store because it's a store of himself through a fee, and that's another people back-to-back store. Back-to-back store loads first, get rid of that. So now I just do +1 in the tight loop and write it out. And the next people says, that was just a relayout. The next people says back-to-back stores. Again, I can pull them out. And you get this kind of effect and get rid of the junk fee and do a little more shuffle layout, but nothing else happened. And now I have a tight loop adding 1. And at the end, I store the last value of the iterator on the way out, and I just load through. So all I'm doing here is I'm showing you, because the memory edges are independent, I can operate on them independently with peoples to do optimizations of all kinds.
Yeah.
And it preserves perfect aliasing information for every local people role.
Yeah. So that's what I was thinking I'd be able to do. And so I'm kind of trying to restrict the language to make things simpler. So I was not going to provide, even array access to like SRAM in the control. I kind of simple, like removing
arrays,
things,
right?
What? When we're doing sort of array type objects, my thinking is that I could, that's always happening in the PE array. And then I just say, there's an array, there's a sort of memory region that's one alias, and I might be operating somewhere in it. I don't know, maybe that's the same thing.
Say that again? Yeah,
So,
right. I'm aliasing together all the bodies of the arrays. Like I don't do any special aliasing in the body, but each array content skipping the length is figured to be its own alias class.
yeah.
And if you're doing your PE and you're breaking your arrays up into discontiguous chunks, like there's no overlap between them, you could declare them their own alias class.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have, things like FIFOs and weight arrays that are never going to change and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
All on alias class, all on memory edges. And then the
Yeah.
memory edge serializes the memory ops along that alias class and is independent of all the others.
Yeah. And then I was thinking that, to do the ability to deal with state as the row mask changes, to just basically take these aliases and be able to split them and then merge them back. So I can split, if my F register state is set, coming into a function, it's set for all rows, then I might change it for some rows and not for others. Then that might be useful information while I'm doing optimizations within the loop. But then by the end, I just sort of merge them back and say, well, here's the new all rows state. It's got some rows changed.
Yeah. And AA's internal IR is doing that even right now.
Okay.
So
yeah.
I have a split and join memory that exactly takes disjoint unaliased things and declare them as a big fat guy. And I go forward, and then I can break it back out with a split into the disjoint unaliased parts.
Okay. Yeah. And then, so the thing that seemed really tricky is how you build this, because if I've got, hundreds of different memory aliases and whatnot, potentially, each one of them has to be available when I do a function call, and it needs to so what I was thinking of doing is have, when I'm initially building the graph, just one IO state, and I just thread it through absolutely everything.
Right.
And then I start splitting it over and over into all of these individual aliases.
Right. So, okay. So in the land of C2 and Java, I specifically pre-split at the start, and you get a lot of them. But they're actually cheap in the grand scheme of things. Like I keep my nodes cheap and my edges as bare pointers, no colored edges, no named edges, so that it's really cheap. So I just have lots of them. But lots in a big Java program would be small count hundreds, tens to hundreds, and they're just carried through as whatever.
Yeah.
The thing that I've been screwing around with AA is lazily expanding and contracting them to try and cut down the bulk node count when most things don't change, and you're just carrying edges from here to here to here to here, and there's no change going on them all. It's sort of like extra. It carries a lot of mass in the graph IR.
Yeah.
So then I have a joined memory op, which says, take all these things that in this next section or never's going to touch, and do one join, gathers them all up, and then I have one memory edge for everything else, and a bunch of edges on shit that's going to actively mutate it. And then I can push them in and out of the split piece by doing a split or a join as necessary. And it adds some complexity. And then there's some heuristics on peoples to try and make sure that I split it when it's useful to make progress, and I join it when it's not, so I don't have to wait. And I don't know if it's going to pay off in terms of compile. It's a compile speed hack. Like
Okay.
semantically, it's no changes having everyone pre-split. So it's purely a compile speed hack. Is it useful? You know what? If you get your pretty prints right, you can have the million independent guys, and you just pretty print and say, and here is ... all the other memories that no one's touching, right? And you don't care.
It's true. Yeah.
And the for loops over 100 things are all cheap and whatever. It's all cheap enough. So it's just a compile speed hack and not necessarily worth it.
Okay. Yeah. My thinking was that it would just be complex. Yeah, you're right. It is just kind of a compile speed hack. Yeah.
Right.
Just like hard to make sense of the graph if you look at it, because there's so many nodes that most of them are not doing anything interesting.
Right.
But-
Upgrade your pretty printer, not necessarily your IR.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, that's my current state. I'm in the middle of doing this as an experiment. It's kind of sort of working. It's kind of sort of more complexity. It's probably just totally not necessary. I probably shouldn't be bothering.
Yeah. So by the way, I've got my sea of nodes graph compiling now from end to end, but a lot
excellent.
of optimization stuff isn't in yet, but it's working. And I can run very simple programs and they run correctly.
Awesome. Yay.
Yeah. So
another convert to the sea of nodes.
Yeah, I'm very happy with it because I just see so many like things where before I was like, I should be able to make this up. I can imagine this optimization, but I can't see how to do it. Like, and now it's like, yeah, I know exactly how I'm going to do it. It's just a people.
Exactly.
What kind of optimization are you thinking about?
Well, things like, I don't know, like knowing what, well, actually this state stuff is a good example. So knowing what the state of different pieces of our array are when, so if I go into a function call, do I need to save away my 7 or 8 different pieces of state, all of which are kind of expensive to shuffle around with, just to call a function that actually didn't do anything with any of them, right? So that's kind of like, so it's like, okay, I want to know that my F register, is set to a specific constant, and then, if I do something else, I can look and say, is it still this constant? And if not, then I don't want to change it. And if it is, then I need to restore it and stuff. And I can make things automatic that people.
I feel like that just sounds like constant propagation in SSA. Like, I don't think that is an inherent property of sea of nodes as described.
Well, yeah, so that's the thing, right? So like, of course you're right that ultimately, every IR is expressing the same stuff. It's just how accessible is it, right? And with the sea of nodes thing, I find that I have very good access to the right information I need when I need it, and it sort of, I don't have to worry about other factors. Like before, I had to think about like block boundaries and all sorts of additional complexity, and now it's just like, no, I don't care about block boundaries. All that stuff gets sorted later.
What's wrong with block boundary? I mean, you still have phi nodes, so.
No. The no block boundary thing is actually really helpful. This is a thing until you live it, it's harder to say. I had so much trouble getting people to buy on this when I first started Sea of Nodes in grad school. And yet, here we are umpteen years later, and it's still hot and going strong. And as soon as you buy drink the Kool-Aid, you get it. But you have to kind of drink the Kool-Aid some.
As I understand it, without boundaries, there's really easier to move code around to
you don't
reorder
move
it.
code. That's the trick. Instead of moving code, you forget that code has a place to be moved. The entire concept of code having a place goes away. That's not part of your thinking, or you're worrying about what an optimization means or does. That's part of the beauty of making it so easy to make changes to. You'll get the place later.
Very intentionally don't do that because we can't reorder most things.
All the semantics are in the sea of nodes to cover all reordering. And that's the reason. Like Java has all these safety checks you can't reorder. Fuck it. I can put them in the graph IR, and that'll tell me exactly what reordering I can and can't do. And if I come up with optimizations that can reorder but keep the same semantics, they're just another people role. I do all the no reordering games on the planet same way. It just, the sea of nodes means everything else, clears out. I don't care no more. It really does clean up all your optimization, low scale optimization thinking. So people rule optimization thinking all like cleans out to, it's a very straightforward this or that. Yes, I have to have a safety check for a null. Yes, it's there everywhere. Yes, it does something that looks like it ought to be a safety check. It's a standard null pointer test in the graph. It has a standard graph IR semantics for null pointer checks, and all the standard people rules apply.
Yeah.
So humor me because I haven't been around since you were in grad school. Can you give me an example of something that?
Well, I just pulled the one out of the picture I just showed you, right? Unspun a loop iterator object, and I moved shit around without worrying about where it landed or how you thought about it placement. It was all just people's. So I can pull that up again and get specific with what we were looking at. Let me
because this feels like one of those find nodes versus basic block arguments kind of thing, at least right now.
There's an aspect to that, but this is it's somewhat different in that it's included that, so that's also there, but there's this other piece of like, here I don't care. So looking at this point in the graph, I have shit like the memory range check safety test here, load, and I cut off the control flow, but there's an exit branch that says you blew a safety check, go to die.
So it's a checked load.
It's a check load, yes.
Okay.
Standard land of Java. I'm not showing the null pointer check. There's a null pointer check, and there's a standard range check everywhere.
Okay, so it's a bunch of deopt exits, basically, implicitly.
Yes.
Okay.
And that I'm not showing the deopt exits here, but they're there. Okay.
Yeah, we have those same things too. They're not shown.
Okay. So one of the things going on here is the array length itself, not the checked exit. The array length itself is loop invariant. Now here I have it invariant because it's hooked.
How do you know what can you this is a lot to take in. Can you go back to the initial one? How do you know from here that it's loop invariant?
Okay, here it is not loop invariant because they have one alias class, and the alias is changing, and so it's pinned behind the red line to the feed. So it's not loop invariant.
Okay.
So I split to the actual aliases I use here. It's still pinned to a fee. It's not loop invariant. But here's the trick that's coming up. I don't look at that yet. There's no place. I don't know that it's forced in the loop or not yet. I'm not even paying attention to that. That will come out later. I don't know, sort it out in the wash later when I do code placement. In the next slide, I'm removing the junk feed. Without moving the load anywhere, it had been sitting, come back to the load. It had been sitting down here. This is just a topological placement issue. It has nothing to do with where you land later. It's hinting that it's in the loop, but none of the dependencies matter that it's in the loop. So I redrew it up here to show it out of the loop, like you might think, but I didn't actually do any motion in the graph. I never said, Mr. Loop changed from one block to another. In fact, at the time it was here, I didn't have a block for it. So I didn't know it was in the loop or not. I didn't care. And when we went to the next step, I didn't know it was in the loop or not, and I didn't care. I still don't know it's not in the loop until I do code placement.
Can you go back to the first one?
Much later. Sorry, what did you say? Can
you go back to the first slide of this?
One more back?
Yeah. Okay, so in the loop here is in the big phi on the left.
Yeah. And there's a use. Okay, you can't bring it off the bottom because I'm not showing you the loose, but there's a test for range check that would says you're stuck in the loop. The range check is stuck in the loop here. I haven't done range check elimination.
I think you're on an intermediate state slide here. I think you need to go one further back because it's, yeah.
Oh, okay. So can you go one forward now?
This is just me breaking out alias classes, but not changing any edges.
So the phi is 8 plus 8. Okay.
So now I'm going to break out to alias classes. This is what I directly admit when I build SSA from bytecodes. Knowing already that iter plus 8 never aliases with array.length, never aliases with array.body.
How do you know that from bytecode?
Because that's part of the Java type system.
Oh. Oh, we don't have that shit at all. Okay.
Yeah, you have Python. So you do what JavaScript does, and you have to put in specialization tests that basically say, these things don't alias, and now I can do more shit with them.
We have a whole aliasing system. It's a nightmare. Everything aliases.
Right. So it all aliases in the large, but in the small, you can declare it not aliased by doing an alias check up front.
Right.
And then say, in this region of code, these things don't alias.
Right.
And this is like what the JavaScripty guys do. They specialize the shit out of things. I do the no alias hack in Java too. If I got two arrays of integers or two arrays of doubles coming in, and I want to go do some optimization where I'm sliding around, I'll pop in these arrays don't alias test up front and deopt. And if it fails the deopt, I'll just recompile, yeah, the alias. And then I might even go the other way and say, these two arrays are always equal. And that does some kind of optimization. And then there's the, these two arrays aren't equal, so they don't alias. So I'm in the no alias two arrays, and now the two arrays can slide past each other. And that's very useful for all the blast.
We would have to be able to prove it because we only do one-shot compilation. So we'd have to be able to prove they don't alias, or whatever something is doesn't alias.
If you do only one shot and you want to play the game, then you would put a bunch of alias tests at the beginning that you thought would always pass, and you'd have two pieces of code. One where they did alias, and all your rules are off, and you're stuck in the bad case, or they did not alias, and then you get to go to town.
Yeah. I think for a lot of it, I think we can do the micro stuff, okay, this iterator doesn't alias, but I think we're not even at that point. We still have to do an unboxing of a lot of things. Right now, iteration is still function calls, which is horrible.
So, okay, so I would inline your function. So where you're at, I don't know.
I'm working on it. We're inlining the function calls eventually.
Okay, so you would inline them into the C. If I was to do this, I'm not saying, whatever. Yeah. This is armchair generaling your problem.
Yeah, fine.
Inline into the sea of nodes while the optimizer is running by having him decide this is a good inline candidate, just add some more nodes in, keep going. Once you find what you think is a hot loop based on anything that looks loopish and or could be hot or profiling or whatever.
We have profiling, yeah.
Put your alias your no alias information around the loop body, clone the loop body into the aliased version, anything aliased and the nothing aliased, and generate two loop bodies. And just on the innermost loop, or second layer if you think the innermost is really short trip count, whatever. You can heuristic your way through that. But you would get the no aliasing in the body followed promptly by, you said it already, hey, I know the iterator is not aliasing with the body stuff. You get the rest of this shit done too. And then, once it's not aliased, you get this effect, and then you can start pulling shit out.
So duplicate a code as a means to specialize all of it.
Yeah. You specialize some, you have to limit your specialization or you blow out compile time and iCache and everything else. So what is the best cutoff you can get for specialization here? I'm thinking just two versions, one where it's all happy land and one where you give it up and it's all sad land.
We don't even do a sad land, we just interpreter. Because I know we'll deopt more as time goes on, but right now we really don't.
So the JS discussion to always to figure out to realize that it's wrong and always fall back to interpreter, always fall back to a known version of code that's working.
Right. So we haven't done that yet.
I have another version of slides for C2 that talk about how I do safety checks. Same kind of game. Let me see if I can find the good safety check guy. This is another Sea of Nodes talk. It's pretty old. There's much more what Derek started with.
So Cliff, if Sea of Nodes is the end-all be-all of compiler IR design, why are people moving away from it?
Moving toward it?
Away from it.
I don't know that they're moving away from it. I haven't heard that. No one was using it until Graal and V8, and they both said are strongly inspired by Sea of Nodes. Now I know Graal has a fairly Sea of Nodes-like thing. Now, is it moving away? I haven't heard anything moving away.
No, not from Graal. Graal is definitely enjoying it, but they do have a nice viz now. I saw the other day where they take the Sea of Nodes graph and they can visualize it as a normal basic block CFG.
Yeah.
So you can still pretend it's like one when you're looking at it.
Yeah, and I have a pretty printer that does.
V8 or Dart getting frustrated. Maybe it was Mozilla getting frustrated and switching.
Yeah, I have a pretty printer that gives me a basic blocky looking thing because it does an early code placement as part of pretty print, but it's just a pretty print. Fine.
I don't think that as much as they're different. They're just different flavors of the same thing.
So what made you think that people are moving away from Sea of Nodes?
You see things on Twitter. People are like, all right, we're moving this compiler. And I don't have an exact reference for you, but I'm wondering there have to be disadvantages, otherwise everybody would be using this, right? Is it?
Yeah, my take. So having done this for a very long time, my take is it's so weird that people have trouble eating it. unless they eat it all way, the whole thing, you know, and then suddenly they love it. And it's so a bimodal switch. I watch people struggle, and then just like Derek did, they crush some threshold. Oh, fucking easy. Wow, this is amazing. Every engineer who does JIT stuff at Sun and Oracle, I'm sorry, just the C2 stuff, has swallowed it a long time ago and lives with it every day, and it's all easy, cheesy, peasy. So, you know, if you swallow the Kool-Aid, suddenly you'll be on the other side of it, looking back like, oh my God, I can't believe I never
This really sounds like Jonestown, but
you know, I'm not trying to sugarcoat here. That's what I'm saying. There is a step function. Apparently, I don't understand why the step function's there. There's a step function.
I don't buy it. I don't buy that it's like complete unalloyed good. What is the downside?
Okay, I mentioned these in things here. So like shit I had trouble with was bulk. Let me see if I have it on the slides there. Bulk cloning operations of the loop ops wanted to come out of SSA. Like it doesn't, okay, that's not helping here. Fine, whatever. So it does not do inlining, but it totally supports inlining. It has no effect with inlining left or right.
Wait, what do you mean it doesn't do inlining?
If you have an inliner that starts with a function that you've made a sea of nodes and another one that calls it as a sea of nodes, you can just touch the graphs together and then it inlines. Very similar operations go for everyone else who does basic block things. No effect. It was actually really fine for CodeGen, but you still have to do CodeGen. It's independent from CodeGen. Like I've done CodeGen basic block style, I've done CodeGen not basic block style, you know, C2 style, no difference. Unrolling meant that you did bulk code duplication, including memory and control flow. And due to, like, I want to say aliasing effects, not like the right word for it, you had a more difficult time than you would think by just stitching graphs together. So basically, if I took an SSA form basic blocks, I unwound the SSA form, I could then clone the code by just rubber stamping basic blocks, by making unrolling by just rubber stamping blocks. Then I have to reinvent SSA. But if you just take SSA on basic blocks and rubber stamp them, you'll be incorrect, and that's very obvious. So you throw the SSA away and you rubber stamp basic blocks and put it in the back. Same thing happens.
Sorry, what do you mean by rubber stamp?
Literally system.array copy of a basic block. I want to take a loop body and I want to make a clone of it because I want to unroll.
Yeah.
Right. So I have a loop body that says I have some control flow and it ends at the bottom with a jump back to the head of the loop and a fallout.
And you want to unroll once or something.
Yeah, I unroll it once. So I get rid of SSA form. I take this code and I just make a copy of it down here. So the first exit, the back edge I strip and says it doesn't go back, it falls. And the exit here is one of the exits. Then I have a second copy. The back edge goes to the top of the first guy, and there's an exit, and that's a merge from the middle of the exit to the bottom exit. So you have a merge at the bottom from the two exit points and a double-sized chunk of code. And then you run the optimizer on that, which one's SSA. So you reinvent SSA in there, and you run the optimizer on it. And that probably says, hey, if I fix my unroll count to be an even number, I don't need this middle test and exit at all, and whatever things happen, and you know, you could do.
So it's harder to do this in sea of nodes because of all the pointers, or what?
It doesn't help, because if you want to preserve SSA form, the transformation does not make it convenient. Sea of nodes can't do a one-for-one just code clone operation and preserve SSA. The same as the basic blocks cannot do it.
Okay.
So you have to rebuild.
Give me a downside. I'm telling you, everything's trade-offs, right? Give me a downside. You haven't done that yet.
I'm doing it. This is the downside. That was
the
the only
downside. Is
downside.
that it's not worse.
I have done.
I would say that it's everything is graph represented. It's pretty easier to wire the graph the wrong way, because on the one hand you have a graph representation of your program.
It is no worse than basic. It's actually easier than the basic blocks. I have done basic block-based high-end optimizing compilers for big, you know, three-letter acronym companies doing performance-winning benchmark numbers, and I have done sea of nodes for the same kind of code, same kind of thing. And the answer was always, it was easier in like every way, except the handful of places that weren't SSA friendly. And then the act of coming out of SSA, doing the transform and going back into SSA, which you did in the basic blocks, I attempted to do it in Sea of Nodes directly. That cost me a lot of engineering work. I think it was worth it, but there is an argument to be made strictly on the loop unrolling guy, where maybe the better answer would have been pretty printed into basic blocks, get rid of SSA, and then rebuild. I don't know. It cost me a lot of engineering to do it at Sun. It gave me more compile speed because I didn't come in and out of SSA form, but it cost me a lot of engineering to make it correct. That was the one real downside. Everything else, I'm saying I'm there. Everywhere else was strictly upside, and I have done every kind of compiler optimization compiler on the planet. Just half a dozen full strength optimizing compilers at big name companies, some Sea of Nodes, some not. You can question that assumption, but I'll tell you that the Sea of Nodes at C2 generates code that's every bit as on par with what you get out of GCC-02 at 100x faster.
So any kind of optimization, be it for the 40, 50 years, you can fit a graph representation optimization like this.
Yeah. That's what I'm basically saying. It was difficult for bulk code duplication that you found in the loop ops and loop unrolling. Not so for inline, where I took some other fresh code and brought it in. That was free. All the people things are free. All the constant propagation games were actually much freer, cheaper than hell. Code generation was just the same. Register allocation just the same. Those were no win, no lose, other than register allocation. You still wanted the def use edges, which you had for free already, but fine, whatever.
I kind of disagree on the statement that everything is trade-offs. Yes, you always have to look for trade-offs, but we could be doing all of our computing with a pen and pencil and paper, or we could use computers.
Yeah.
Is there a trade-off?
Okay, hold on. That's a little disingenuous.
Not really. I'm not saying that this is a comparison between these things. I'm just saying that if everything is trade-offs, then let me show you a counterexample, and it's easier if you look for.
Okay, the trade-off with computers is batteries die, you need electricity, pencil and paper is very easy and reliable. Like, yes, we can argue about
this is not helpful.
That's not helpful, right? It's not.
It's not helpful. But I am saying that there are times when a better way shows up. Most of the compiler industry has moved to SSA in parts. SSA beat the snot out of what came before SSA, and everyone basically moved to it. This is a SSA taken the next level, and not everyone has moved to it. And I'm a strong believer, obviously, but I also had a lot of experience pre-SSA and SSA and Sea of Nodes, and of all of them, this is the better answer by far.
What were people doing before SSA?
Data flow analysis with bit vectors.
Oh, that's tricky.
Oh, it's slower than hell and just as nasty. You can go look us up. You get them in some compiler courses, still teach them.
It worked for the early Fortran compilers.
Yes.
Okay, but Fortran doesn't have any complicated.
Hey, what's the def for this use? What's the use for this def? All that was done with bit vectors.
Use def. I see.
Okay. Here, I found a downside. All right. So, okay.
You have to listen to me on Compiler Club.
So in the V8 compiler, okay, they have like 3 different like backends. Okay. And the main one that they use for most things is turbofan. And that uses Sea of Nodes representation, okay? But they introduced this new backend called Sparkplug, which is a non-optimizing compiler, and it just takes the bytecode and it outputs assembly code. And the reason they bypassed the Sea of Nodes representation was because it was too slow to build the graph, and they just wanted to generate machine code. So that's the downside, is that you have to build a graph.
This is the upside or downside of any IR. There are totally space in a JVM jetted scenario where you read bytecodes and you interpret, or you read bytecodes and you spit out the interpreter's templates one after another, which is a stage 0 template jet, and there's no compiler IR. And that's a price point that gets you code faster for run once to run 3 to 5 times code. By the time you're running a loop,
they use CFGs? Like basic block CFGs, or they just do a template?
No, I mean, I don't know what they're doing, but I have done this game before. I did it with templates. Like,
right, it's a latency trade-off.
Yes.
Fine.
Yes, and totally fine. And no basic blocks and no code gen per se. It's just templates slapping down. And your control flow graph was just done by taking the basic bytecode numbers in Java bytecodes, and you would jump to another bytecode number. So you scaled every template by the average template size. And that was where the next template was going to go. And if templates are too big, you called out of line and came back. And you'd have to build a CFG then.
Wait a minute, why do you have to expand? Why can't you have variable size?
Because you don't know on a forward branch, you're reading bytecodes, you read a bytecode, you spit down machine code, you execute it. When you fall off the bottom, you read the next bytecode. The next time through, you're just running machine code.
Leave a fat label and then
now you have a fat forward label that you have to take. It's a forward branch. You have to take it. Where do you branch to? You have to skip some bytecode.
Right, you go and you patch at the end.
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do it. One of them is if I hit a function, I just emit all the templates all at once, and then I look at where the offsets landed, and I build them that way. And that there's still no control flow graph. It's just variable offsets, but it
you just have an array of labels.
And basically you also do array of labels. I'm doing array of labels where the bodies are scaled by the template size because it's actually faster than the indirect array of labels. But you don't know what the size, but I made them fixed size. You do variable size, you can do it all. But most functions that JavaScript's worrying about are run once for setup. So most of your JITted code then is never actually executed, and that costs you more. So you actually want to execute a bytecode, template it and execute it one at a time, and hoping that you're hitting back to yourself again soon enough. Bye.
So you're saying it's not even the whole function that gets executed. You're saying it's literally opcode by opcode.
Yeah, this is the reason. Yeah. You play this game if you're going opcode by opcode. Yes, because most of these things say shit like, if global flag is null, exit.
Okay, so that's kind of like isomorphic to basic block versioning, or like tracelets.
Tracelets.
They're all similar. Okay.
Yeah, these are all things that don't want an IR, and they just doing spit code out. And I don't know what turbofan versus sparkplug, but I totally get there's a trade-off there, and there's a useful place to go.
The people over at Shopify are doing some very interesting stuff with what they call basic block versioning, because that's what their tech lead does. It was her PhD thesis, but that's what they're doing for Ruby, because there's so much dynamism that you just like have branches this way and branches this way and specialize like 4 times, and that's
right. And you want to specialize, and like yeah.
So for
the specialization
point, because time to first paint is very important on a lot of websites.
Yeah.
For your Python, how much do you care about things like I want to be able to write ls in Python and have that be fast, versus how much do you care about, most of the programs I'm expecting to run are going to run for more than 300 milliseconds?
Both. We probably should have 2 compilers. We don't. But the compiler latency is still important for the server. This is stuff I've said publicly, so I can say it here. Cleared it with comms. So we have a server startup, and there's this social constraint, which is not a technological constraint. I must impress upon you, it's not like a hardcore thing. It's like people want this. Is we redeploy every 15 minutes, new code.
Okay. Fine.
So every second you're compiling or loading code, it's like that times the number of workers losing out on requests.
Yeah, in the land of Java programs, the C2 JIT typically burns for the first 5 seconds a lot, and for the next 2 minutes kind of dribbles in, and then after a couple minutes until you do a phase shift in your program, it costs you nothing. It dribbles.
We have no more than 30 seconds.
I'm sorry?
We have no more than 30 seconds to compile the entire server.
Okay. Yeah, C2 typically, he uses multiple cores, and he's not compiling everything though. He all the interpreted shit runs the interpreter.
Right. So we have profiling information that we're going to use to make decisions on what to compile, but like we have a hard cutoff. It's like
I have a question on that. Now, with the JVM, the constraint is you want to run on every type of hardware. So therefore you JIT, right? I mean, that's
that's not why you JIT. The JIT has a portable backend that covers every kind of hardware, and it costs nothing in terms of compile speed. With the
exactly. Yeah.
But it's about getting away from having binaries with versioning issues. That was half of it, and the other half is being able to do class for name.
So Derek, you're saying JIT instead of AOT.
Well, yeah. So I'm just wondering why, if you're deploying every 15 minutes and you're in your own internal infrastructure, why you would JIT versus AOT when you know everything about your internal infrastructure?
Because we have to write a linker and a loader.
Yeah,
that sounds really unpleasant.
Well, there's linkers and loaders out there, but they're not that fast. I don't know.
No, but we have to write it like it's not just like a normal linker. It's like, okay, we have to load the thing and then patch the value of the heap allocated integer 0, or like this class or this whatever.
Right, and it's yeah, you have a more difficult linker, but linker's been around. I don't care. Fine.
There's a world in which we say, okay, we can serialize the whole heap and then like mmap it and be done.
Yeah.
That would take also significant engineering effort. So right now it's like, okay, the compilation speed isn't that slow. We're pretty fast right now. But as soon as we start doing like, we can't do like trial inlining, for example, because that's too much.
Like I said, C2 is really fast, and fuck, I inline by tons. And it has nothing to do with like the peephole and the sea of nodes are part of it being fast. That's part of the speed. This shit is built in nanoseconds from the bytecodes. It's like unbelievably fast to build, except for the Java shit that has nothing to do with the sea of nodes that comes in as part of semantics for Java bytecodes. The actual read the bytecodes and spit out IR. It's like every bytecode spits out IR in a couple of nanoseconds. It's like an allocation into your hot in your L1, jam some pointers down, done.
So I guess for a medium-sized function right now, we take 100,000 nanoseconds to convert to. For right now, for a medium-sized function, we take about 100,000 nanoseconds to convert to from bytecode, and then another 50,000 for SSA.
No, right. So I claim I'm hugely faster than that already.
Now, we haven't done any optimization. We use unordered map and stuff like that. So
you got some orders of magnitude to go to catch up. I'll get SSA, whatever medium-sized function is in Python versus Java. But if I say it's 100,
a lot of nodes.
Yeah.
This is like 100 or 200 IR instructions.
Yeah, right. 100, 200 IR instructions. I'll be done in 1 microsecond, not 100 microseconds. But there's something else going on there. And I could step you through the build strategy here, but it's stupidly easy and stupidly fast. You've seen this. I think you've seen this talk on how to build it fast. The actual costs are they're few pointer bumps, and there's no cache missing generally, and a few pointer stores, and you're done.
Well, so for the metadata for like finding basic blocks, and I mean, you still have to do the same thing functionally. It's not like you still have to have boundaries of things. You just have to create these pointers out of linear bytecode. Like, what structures are you using?
Maybe we should walk it through, because there's not a lot of that going on. I do have to track when you split and merge the bytecodes. I take my mappings, which are hash tables and small ones typically, and I clone them. And that's the metadata. That's usually done with the recursive descent parser kept on its stack as he goes down and up walking bytecodes and a recursive descent.
Wait, you do recursive descent on bytecode?
Yeah. You read a bytecode, read a bytecode in a loop. You come to a branch. You make a function call to do the branch, and then you return and you go the other side. That's one way to do that. I've done it with looping, and I've done it. I think the current version. No, I think the current version's probably looping. I've unrolled the stack internally, if you will. But I know I started with like recursive descent, but that's not the cost either way.
Right.
For me, the costs are I read the bytecode. I did the semantics to do the conversion. That actually has a vcall that's going to do some missing around. And then I do typically a bump pointer on a private compiler thread local storage arena that fits in your cache for even your L1 for this kind of method. Stuff in a vcode table, stuff in 2, 3, 4 pointers, depending on the semantics of the opcode, stuff in a small byte. That's the object you're done. I guess you stuff in the reverse direction, which is going to be filled in later with a null right now. And it's built the node and you're done. You go back through the next bytecode. If I come to a jump, I've had a hash table that was part of the lookup for pointers. So when I stuffed pointers in, I did a lookup. I got a, Java object name, whatever. And if they're labels, it was a hash table. And if they're indices into Java stacks or Java registers, it's just an array. Do an array lookup to get the reverse pointer to stuff in your node. This is IR building. You want to watch the IR building slides? I've done them on here a month ago or 2 months ago.
Sure. Yeah, I was missing for a couple months because it was staying up too late and not waking up. At 10 a.m.
This is
Fridays.
more semantics. IR building. Let's do IR building one. So hang on. I also was going to show up some how you do like fast, cheesy, easy safety check optimizations in the full grand scheme of things. No, not presentations, easy SSA, boom, build it, boom, here we go. Okay, back to screen share. I'll go fast because other people have seen this, but you stop me if you're like confused because I'm going fast because other people have seen this. So go build SSA fast and easy. This is like easy way. It's not minimal SSA. If you care, I can go to that. And the key thing to think about here is I'm going to build a node in the graph, which means I have a pointer to a node. That pointer can the alpha be renamed as flat p and a printf as some hex pointer, which is alpha renameable to like x of 0 or whatever names you have in your normal code. These are all alpha renamed.
Fine. Registers are instructions. Fine.
Yeah. Okay. So I have some program text. I'm going to show you distance, not square rooted, but x squared plus y squared. And I'm going to get some SSA thing out. And this is just going to be an expression. I'm done. Everyone knows how to build an expression DAG, but it's the lead into the next piece where I do control flow. So my parser is going to be, I'm ignoring parsing. I do bytecodes for C2, obviously, but I do recursive descent text parsing. Same thing. So ignoring how I parse.
Hold on, you build SSA from text in AA?
Yeah, directly. Yeah, and it's very efficient, cheap, and fast, and easy. Blah blah blah. Yes, has all the same properties. It's nothing to do with, like the parsing has nothing to do with building SSA here in terms of complexity or difficulty.
Sure.
I have a standard recursive descent parser. I could do that on bytecodes. I can do it on AA. Fine. I could do it on C, but not C++ because C++ has semantic things that make it difficult to do a recursive descent parser. Python probably does a recursive descent parser just fine. Okay, fine.
No, we use PEG now. It's a whole thing.
Okay, fine. I won't. I mean, I don't know Python enough to know that part. So fine. Okay. So I'm going to skip parsing details. I have a map at the bottom of my screen, standard string to node map, and a stack for expressions. And in the case of Java, I have just 2 arrays, one for the Java stack and one for the Java register numbers. But if I was doing parsing in AA, I do string lookup. Fine. Okay. X and Y are already mapped to some prior thing because I'm not showing the start of the program. So, and for this particular expression, they're already done. Fine. The IR is in blue. The green is the extra semantic overhead the parser needs. So if I parse an X, I look it up. I push it on my expression stack. No change to the IR. It's just expression stack shit. It's just parser shit. Again, a multiply, save the operator for later. I'm not talking precedent strategy. Different for AA from Python, whatever, fine. Grab the second X, push it on your expression stack, looks good. Find the multiply, find the end of the multiply expression, however that's done, that's your precedence parsing.
Yeah.
Pop 2 things, put a multiply node, push it back on the stack. So what does that mean? It means literally I make a new node, which is a bump pointer on a C arena. So I do a bump pointer that can't run out, or I'm out of memory for my compiler, which that's actually not hard to fix. Fine. Then I stuff a vtable in. I usually put in the little runtime type info and a byte. I put in an X pointer and a Y pointer. Turns out I put a null for a control pointer, which add doesn't or multiply doesn't need. I put a reverse pointer in, which is null because I don't have them yet. and then I'm done. That's like bump pointer allocations, a clock. There's 4 or 5 stores, which x86 eats 1 per. It's 5, 6 clocks. I'm done. But back on the expression stack, that was, you know, not 10 clocks even. This is like stupidly fast. Do an operator, save it for later, look at y, when it reaches all, just repeat for x. Now I get some real, you know, some real juice here. I have to allocate, build, push, and I'm done. I built an expression stack. Oh, you know, the store into the dist equals just goes into the map. So yep, I get an expression tag, pretty easy, but that took me, like I said, you know, something stupid like 10 clocks per plus whatever it takes to do parser X lookup in your hash table, or in Java case, it's actually array lookups. So it's not 10, but it's 20 or 40. It's not a whole lot. Def use edges come later when I'm done parsing, but I'll just do the obvious graph walk to get def use edges. And my edges are all pointers, raw pointers, and that's for speed. That's how I can get this down so cheap. There is no allocation for a pointer or for an edge, and it's just a raw pointer. So here's some control flow. Let's just cap X at the wall. X is a bouncing ball. It's going to cap at wall. So I have some basic block. I computed X, but I'm not talking about CFGs, so I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to use a CFG in the next talk. I mean, CF nodes in the next talks. Here I'm going to use basic blocks. So the same strategy works on basic blocks, by the way, other than you have to make a basic block structure, which CF nodes has some equivalent costs. Fine. So I'm going to hide the other bits here. I'm just looking at X and wall. They're in some basic block. Fine. Parse X greater than wall. There's the X. There's the wall. There's the greater than. They're all been thrown in. Same cost to build them as the multipliers we were earlier. Oh, I now have to tie it to the basic block because it's the control test for the block. And all basic block forms that do branches have the last op does a test or has some way to indicate. So there's some tie-in pointer store, 1 or 2 pointer stores to tie in. Okay. Moving on, I make 2 blocks. CF nodes will make roughly the equivalent things. Just my 2 new basic blocks. I need a map clone. So I literally system array copy the map. Boom, I got a clone. I have to track it. Now I do the recursive.
So these are stored per block.
These are stored per actively parsed block, not all blocks for all time.
Got it.
So to the depth that you're doing nested ifs, you have nested maps. Yes. But they unwind, and I reshare them because that's part of your storage space, which turns into fitting into L1, which turns into the fun 10x speed up that I get for being in L1 all the time. Fine, but I clone one, and then I pick a side, whatever, left here. I go do my stack, look up wall, shove it. I'm done with the true block, so I'm going to keep the block because I haven't had a merge yet. And I get a unique map, as I just said, per actively parsed in process. Go to the other side. There's no IR was generated there, by the way. So the blue stuff didn't change. It's just the green pointers kept going. Parse the X, look it up in your map. Push the node on your expression stack on the right. You're done. I have 2 maps. I have to merge them. What's it mean to merge 2 maps? Well, this is my recursive descent came back from the right side, and now I'm at a merge point where I've done the left, I've done the right, I have to merge. What's it mean to merge? Okay, make a merge block. I'm going to merge stacks and maps. So what does merge mean? To take one map from
Sorry,
2 maps.
Why do both of the X's point to the left X and both of the walls point to the right wall?
Because that's the definition of X. X has not been modified yet. So at this point in the parse, okay, neither wall nor X has been modified yet. That's coming. I'm going to store X in a second, but it hasn't happened yet. So now what I do is I simply compare the 2 maps element by element, and where they differ, I put a phi in. Where they're the same, that's the value, and I make 1 map from 2. So I pick one of my maps as well, here I'll do the phi first. I look at the 2 stacks. Hey, they point to different things. I need a phi. So a phi is bump pointer allocate, stuff on left, stuff on right, put a reverse RTTI, whatever. There's 5, 6 stores, you're done. And phis, like most nodes, are ordered. Like multiplies, the edges are unordered, but greater thans and subtracts and phis, their edges are ordered to order.
Wait, how is multiply unordered?
Because X times Y is Y times X.
Not in floats. Do you have a different thing for floats?
I do.
Okay.
There's a float multiply. There's an associativity. And actually in C2, there's like, do you form a group or a ring or whatever the fuck, an abelian group or something? And then you get these set of transformations. And if you don't, you don't.
All right.
And so Java has the precise Java or strict Java semantics, and I honor it, and I won't do the associativity games. And if you're not strict, I associate the hell out of floats. So there's a runtime flag for that.
Got it.
Okay. Then I do map here. All the edges are the same because no one updated anything. So the map has no changes. They're both identical. So I get one
So
map.
in the merge, you
map,
just use one?
I'm sorry?
In the merge, you just pick one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pick one as the winner. I shove updates to them in the winner, and the loser goes on a free list of maps because the maps get used a lot and they're all roughly the same. So I just pull another one off the free list, and therefore they stay in my L1. So I throw the extra back onto the free list, and I have this as the new merge state, where there is a stack expression has a fee, and the map just points to the old thing because nothing changed, except for the fee showed up. Then you know, an x equals, which updates the map, pops this stack. And that was it for you know, a split diamond merge point. And then I'll do a loop here in a second. And like I said, this is like, it costs exactly what I'm saying. They're like 10 clocks per node or 40 clocks per parse of expression a node, counting all the lookups you have to do. And this is what C2 does on Java bytecodes for 40 years, you know, 20 years, 25, 30 years. So here's a loop.
And most of those lookups are in the L1.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Because that map is literally a stupid ass hash table of small size, you know, C hash table of small size. It grows if necessary for big functions. It'll be more than 4 things, but it won't be 64K's worth of mapping shit unless you're some ginormous method.
Well,
so
do you have like a
machine-generated
specialized
code can run you out. You know,
like hash tables are slow, really slow. Do you have a specialized like small table that doesn't actually hash anything?
When you say hash tables are really slow, I'll claim that you have some screw up going on. You should try non-blocking hash map for a fast versus slow test. I had Googleators like test non-blocking hash map versus all kinds of single-threaded, sequential only specialized hash tables, and it basically tied everybody, except he's also completely concurrent.
So you're saying that like a non-MT safe hash map was going to be significantly faster?
I'm saying that you can make hash tables really cheap. This one I'm showing here is doing string to node lookups. If you have a hash function on your string, which is sensible, that'll be most of your costs. The hash table itself should only be, you know, 2x-ish oversized over the max count of variables you're going to have in it. I use open-coded hash tables, no linked list things on collisions, it's just reprobe. Strings for identifiers for programs are both fairly short and fairly unique, so you can do some cheesy, easy hash function code on them and get away with it. And then I claim the string should be something like load a byte, shift scale add, load a byte, shift scale add till I ran the identifier out. I got my hash code. I got it while I was parsing the fucking string. Okay, now I have a string and a hash hanging around, and I go, you know, go to my table and I do the lookup. Okay, that's an array, check. That's a, you know, and sign for a power of 2 array size, probe in the table. Look and see if I have an empty slot or I missed or I got something. Now start comparing bytes to see if it's a hit. If it's a hit, I win, I'm done. If it's a miss, then I reprobe. What's the reprobe? I usually add the hash that I had just had to itself and re-end it. Found another spot in the table and go again. Fine. However you want to do the hash, you say hashes are really slow, fucking hashes should be faster than hell.
Okay. To clarify, I'm using like a STL unordered map.
There's your problem. Quit that. I predate STL. So I just wrote the stupid hash code as a grad student that you would use. It's still in use at Hotspot. It's still a decent, nothing special hash table. Hash your strings, mask to the table size, do a probe, failed, add the hash, remask and probe again. I get a typical probe rate of like 1.2, 1.5 for AA code for this kind of a thing. It's all
we
stupid.
could stand to revisit our data structures.
I have a code test that tries to add a cell to make always the perfect sized array to make it always the perfect hash map. and you test different salts. This is without going to intermediate array, just one lookup in your hash function, and iterate with some salt or end your case in a unique location, and you're done. Yeah.
So my reprobe is grab the hash that you just had and do something stupid with it to the guy, either add it or shift and add it or whatever. Just some dorking around. But yeah, you add a salt and you look again.
Yeah.
All right.
Essentially the same thing.
So I claim the lookup should also run you in the modest nanosecond range, and if it's not tens of nanoseconds, then you got something going wrong in your hash table. That's a separate lookup issue. All right, you ready to do a loop? Which is
let's do it.
Do just almost identical. So here's a loop, which is stupid because it fits on one slide, but it does enough work to be interesting, but it just fits on one slide. That's the only reason I picked this loop. So I set my map up to the 0 for x and sum, just by parsing the x equals sum equals, however that's done. That's going to be, one look for 0, make a node, one look up sum, point it, one look up x, point it, carry on. I hit the head of a loop. I clone the map now because I don't know what the back edge is going to be, but I have a merge point. So I need two maps.
How do you know it's a loop? Because it's literally the while keyword in this case.
In this case, it's literally the while keyword.
Okay.
In the land of Java bytecodes, I do a pre-pass over the bytecodes looking for back edge pointers, and I flag them.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
A couple of Java bytecode stupid things I have to do that add costs that, like AA doesn't need it either. C code, it's always, if I have a label, oh, you're a go-to point, you're a merge point. If I don't, you're a while or a for, you just know. Fine. Okay, clone the map. System.array copy, blam, done. Now I put in a feed for every possible back edge value, including ones that I don't know yet. And this is where I become not minimal SSA.
So they don't have a right arm?
I don't have a back edge yet. The back edge is shown on the chart as here, but I don't know what it is. Yes, oh yes, I'm sorry. The fees do not have a right arm. They are all blank.
Okay.
On the right side. The left side I point to where they belong. The right side I point to null. All right. Do the body. That's the first half of the body for the exit test. I hack the basic block to less than 10, and I jump to printf, and I clone a map for the printf as the exit code, which I'll get to when I get to printf, which hasn't happened yet. So I'm not showing the clone for the printf side, but there's a third map in progress now. Parse the plus equals sum x, that updates the sum. Parse the plus plus on x, updates the x. I'm at the body of the loop. I have a hard go-to to the top. So I just drag the map along, and now I have my two maps at the top, and I do the merge. So here is the maps before the merge, and here's the maps after the merge.
Okay.
The map is not drawn here, but I should have drawn the map. Oh, I dropped the map because I'm done with that merge point, and it doesn't flow forwards from there anymore because I already did the flow forwards. So literally those two maps both go on the free list. And that's SSA for my loop.
Okay.
And then I use the map I didn't show for the printf on sum, and I update the whatever call op for printf is, and he takes an argument of sum, and that's done. Those two forms, the split and the merge, cover all your control flow graph needs. And that's, other than the basic blocks, which I don't bother with, that's what I do for C2 and for AA. So now I'm going to talk about optimizations that happen here. What about wide dist wall? They were not part of the prior picture, but they were part of the prior code because I started with them as XY dist, and I said, don't show XY and dist because, Y dist and wall, because they're not part of this next piece. So what happened to them here? Well, I put a fee in for them. And when it hit the bottom and I brought it around, I made a junk fee that self-looped. And it says, Y will point to a junk fee. But I do a peephole rule, and I say it's a local peephole rule. Semantics, any edge that comes in crossing the red line has to have a matching semantics. I can use anything that goes out. In this case, it's just a 1-for-1, and I delete it that way. And I unwound the fee node allocation out of my arena, and then I'm done. I have whatever. And then the next talk is me doing lots of people optimization and showing that you can get shit tons of good optimization done by just using people. So one of the other funny games here is that I totally do people's while I parse. That drops my IR size in the land of Java, at least with safety checks, with redundant safety checks that get removed. That drops my IR by roughly a factor of 4 over not doing people's while you parse, because so many null pointer checks get elided. Other checks get elided too, but null pointers is the big winner. Something like 90% of my null pointer checks get elided while I'm parsing. I make the null pointer test, I put an if, I put a null check, I put an exit case, I look backwards, I find a prior if, there's a peephole, I says this if is dominated by that if, it dies, I remove it. I throw it back on the arena and I reuse that storage for the next allocation of IR. So, you know, people while you parse. Not minimal SSA, but really close. Oh, there's the speed up while you parse, yeah. And that's it. That's you know, that's my fast and easy SSA build. And like I was saying, it's like super fast. Way more time spent. What you just described was more time in your hash table lookup than I'm doing just building the entire IR. It's like, no.
Okay, well, I didn't tell you that wasn't a hash table lookup time. That was a. But yes, I get your point. I mean, a lot of these things don't have to be hash tables either. It can be like an array. But here we are.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, if you know, you start from scratch knowing that you're building an IR quickly, you can build it really quickly. And that cuts down your initial time to code gen.
We had to build a compiler very quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this was C2 was also built this way very quickly. I did this as the fast way to build SSA from Java bytecodes from scratch as a JIT compiler from scratch. It's not long to build this either. There's not, you saw the amount of technology involved. There's not a lot.
Yeah.
Big things that I didn't mention were like, because you don't know it and you haven't done it, you'll want have pretty printers to help you understand the graph you just made.
Right.
But they're actually not hard either, but you'll want them and know that you'll want them. So count that in your compilation engineering cost build time.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Food for thought.
Mostly, I'm just going to look at the data structures. I think we're in the, we're not moving to C of nodes. Sorry, but
yeah, fine. I had to throw it out there though, because you said some things like no, and I'm like, yeah.
I know. I said, give me something. Like most people can point to their choices and be like, here was a concrete downside, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for that.
Yeah, I'm telling you, there wasn't. There were several things that we did wrong that had concrete downsides that we unwound, or I would never do again, but not the C of nodes. I did. I'm serious, dude. You're right, like, Alan, you've never been there, but I have, and it was there. So there was a screw up where the runtime team decided that they were going to go to 64-bit math everywhere because the new Spark chip had 64 bits and x86 had to support 32 bits still. And so the old support for 64-bit longs and x86 was as 2 unrelated pairs. And the largest consumer of long math on x86 of that era was crypto, big integer doing crypto, which typically used pairs of events to represent an array of events and did long like things with them. But he shifted by 32 and he added and subtracted the overflow bits and then picked one half the other and masked and shit. That all worked really well in the optimizer as a pair of 32-bit ints because I could just pick one register or the other to do the masking, or the shift by 32 was just take the high instead of the low, and it all optimized away. And as a 64-bit thing, it was a pair of x86 integer registers. And on the earlier versions, that meant I had 3 pair plus a 7th register, and on the stack pointer was elsewhere. And that gave me 3 registers, and you spilled long math everywhere on an x86. It was a huge slowdown. And I chewed out the runtime team and rolled it back and said, no, we're doing the pair events for a while yet until everybody had 64-bit. And then we went to 64-bit everywhere. But yeah, there was a premature jump to 64 bits that was a fail out.
Alan, let's hear it.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I don't actually know if this is a problem, but like I've seen there's some IRs that are optimized for higher order functions, and like I get the impression that like, you know, the C of node stuff is a first order graph and it doesn't really support higher order functions that well. So that might be a downside.
So that's my experiment with AA. I have higher order functions in AA. And I don't know I mean, haven't played it out to where I see that I care, that it's doing, that I'm missing something. Like the optimizations that you might do with higher order functions, carrying on function pointers, or I contract directly in the sea of nodes, and then it would trigger inlining later. I get a call graph that's pretty precise out of sea of nodes, but that's like constant propagation on steroids and has not much to do with sea of nodes per se. I don't see a downside. I don't see an upside at the moment. It's just rolling through like I would in a.
Isn't JavaScript all higher order functions?
Yeah, yeah.
And isn't that what V8's doing?
Yes, they're doing a sea of nodes with JavaScript with higher order functions. Like a lot of your costs are not the higher order function failure optimized. A lot of your costs are because you don't have low level type info, you have to endlessly do safety checks for int overflow or floating point to int conversion, or is this a function pointer or not? And they mostly specialize the hell out of things in order to know they have regions where they can trust the types. And that turns into having optimizations of safety checks as your key thing. And the sea of nodes does really well with optimizing safety checks. So I have a slide up for one of the many things I do with safety checks that I'm going to throw up because no one asked. This is
so while you're
looking at a safety check.
Oh, never mind.
Too slow. Don't look at it. Don't look at it. But this is just like I have a pile of nodes and I do this. Oh, you had a repeated null check. So I do this unzip thing. And it's not, you could do this in basic blocks, but it falls out as a peephole in the sea of nodes. It's like straightforward local micro optimizations.
I mean, we also have this, like, this is a peephole in basic blocks too, where it's like, oh, we have a type, are you null? Are you not null? Or are you maybe null? Or are you definitely null?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And then you just like, if you're null, return yourself. Don't return the
unwind it. Okay. Yeah. So I can, it's SSA, so you get to do the distance thing works as well. Like however far away the pointer, the test is, but yeah, fine. And the other big win on that one is just the bailout to the interpreter if you fail the first check and don't have any merge backs. So then it's just straight line code after the first test.
V8 avoids a lot of the pathological cases of higher order functions because they don't have tail recursion. So people still tend to use loops rather than super deeply nested recursion, which is where I think a lot of the IRs tend to get themselves confused because it's like, I unrolled this thing and then constant propagated and then unrolled some more and then constant propagated some more and then unrolled some more and then constant propagated some more. And you just end up doing that for 10,000 iterations or something.
Yeah. C2 has cutouts for that. All the micro optimization, all the micro benchmarks from the very early Java days had loops that computed things you can compute with closed form solutions by the compiler, by doing nothing special, like stupid shit. And so there would be people would do these tests like, how fast can you run Zors in a loop? And I'm like, compared to my C compiler, and I was like, well, 10 milliseconds to interpret to 10,000 iterations, 10 milliseconds to JIT the code to a closed form solutions, 10 milliseconds to print the answer, and you're done. Independent of trip count. And then they would all get confused because their harnesses didn't expect the time to completion to be independent of trip count. So they all got bad answers for Zors per second that they could do, or BOGO ops per second. It was all kind of junky things like that going on. Big name folks like Cymarks and the like were also failing the same way. Hey, let's do signs in a loop. How many signs per second? Well, okay, first answer is Java does precise signs, not imprecise. You can't use the x86 sign op because it doesn't give you exact answers. The next answer is if you put a billion of them in a loop and you don't keep changing things, C2 gives you a closed form solution and you're done, independent of trip count. And both of those blew out different people's heads in different ways, and they were all confused by the answers. Yeah. But the unroll thing, yeah, totally. You have to just watch how much code expansion you get and cut it off at some point. Like the C2 does recursive functions and he inlines them, and that may trigger more inlining. He just watches the total size of things and he stops after so many times or so much inline volume. But that's not really C2 or C of nodes. That's just, you know, how big did it get? Should I inline again? That basic blocks have the same solution, same answer.
And when you inline, I assume you immediately go for whatever optimizations you can, right?
Yeah. Well, it's an AA. C2 did inlining prior to running the main peoples because of stupid decisions for Java. that I would not do, I would do differently, and Graal does them differently as well. So yes, the obvious answer is you just added some nodes in the middle of the graph, you throw them on the work list, and he immediately eats up the corners where the inline touches the original, and then it folds in with everything else and disappears.
Yeah.
There are no line in the sands where code got inlined in C2. I don't know where it inlined, it completely gets dissolved into the body.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to do my inlining stuff yet. I haven't. So far, I've done no inlining, no optimization.
Right,
really.
right. Yeah.
So,
But like Java has accessors, and you must inline them always 100%, and they must fold away and not have any lines in the sand where I inlined or I didn't. You know, they just have to go away.
yeah, no, I won't have any production worthy code until some of that stuff is running, but at least I can compile some tests. And
yeah,
now my main thing is getting the array code working, and then I'm going to go into the inlining.
Oh, we lost Matt.
Yeah, he was waving. I think he.
Oh, I missed. Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he sounds like he's going to be a hardcore naysayer, but he hasn't used it, so he doesn't know. But he's being a hardcore naysayer. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah,
All right. Well, we're here at 12:30, so it's like pretty far along, and I've ranted for a long time, so maybe it's time to be done.
Yeah, I was just gonna I was wanting to add this. I don't know if it's a very relevant argument, but I think that with long-lived code bases, how much churn you see in the code is very highly related to code quality. And if you look at C2, you see huge swaths of code which say initial import, right, from when they, in the git blame.
Yeah.
And so to me that says, okay, this is code that nobody needed to change, even though Java went from, like, when they imported to Git, it was like way before Java 6.
Oh yeah. Oh,
So,
it's a Git. Oh God, it came in. Yes, all right, right. It came at Sun's era of Code Mangler or whatever they had. Code Manager was Code Mangler.
yeah, but it's still more
yeah.
than a decade.
Yeah.
So lots and lots of stuff has changed in Java, but C2 is, only grown, but not changed.
People have added peepholes continuously, slowly over time. I knew like Zur is not on right now, but he was doing Zen was doing string ops as peepholes.
Yeah. So speaking of companies that have left Sea of Nodes, or I've heard that Azul is now on LLVM. Does that mean that they've gone away from that?
So I don't know. So you need Arthur for that. He was on earlier, darn it. He's been working on LLVM interconnect to Azul for a long time, exactly for ahead of time compilation, exactly for high frequency traders who want to hit the market with pre-jitted high quality code. So he's both like saving out profiling information and sucking it into LLVM. Having said that, I think he's recently said it's still not the default JIT for them. They still ship C2 as the default JIT. But you can turn it on for specific things, and it's useful exactly in the scenario I mentioned where you want to have high quality pre-jitted code before you do any profiling.
Right. So it's kind of like Graal with their native image stuff or whatever.
I guess so.
Maybe that's using C2. I don't know what that's using.
Yeah, I don't know what that one's using. I know they had intentions of jitting code using the Graal JIT with the profiling and then saving it and being able to reload it.
Yeah.
And C2 never went down that path because of the whole issues with what was inlineable that the JIT assumed was inlined and what order classes got loaded in or whatever. And you had to bring in one fell swoop all the classes that C2 used for this PFAS compilation and the effects of their CL init, so the heap updates, when you wanted to bring in this piece of code. Like A called B, but under the hood, previously in the prior life, the network packets had come in and a bunch of hash table shit had happened and things had modified and changed and whatever. And then C2 probed around and found all the state of global variables and all the currently loaded classes and did some various kinds of analysis on it and inline things and if tested this, that, whatever, and did a lot of stuff. Okay. Then you pickled all that and threw it out to the disk. Now you restarted and you came back in, A called B again, but the network packet hadn't hit, so the hash table hadn't hit, so you hadn't pre-initialized class X, and now C2 has to make different code to be semantically correct. Or you have to stop and load this class without having the, the driver from the network packet, right? But you can look, and the CLinit does only stupid things that have no effect and are going to happen anyhow. And you'll eventually get that thing. So you could early, CLinit it and preload the class and preload. There's a bunch of work in the runtime, had nothing to do with the JIT to make you able to load in code. And that's what, as far as I know, Arthur and Grawl have been doing, and I did not.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, interesting. I haven't yet tried looking at V8 source code, but maybe at some point. It's V8 and growth. So there's like some pretty interesting compilers out there that are using C of nodes, and despite being niche, it seems highly competitive with the thing that mostly everyone's doing, and mostly everyone's a lot more resources. So
yeah,
I find it pretty interesting.
All right. Thank you. And I'm gonna. Well, any other questions? And hi, Jim. I haven't seen you in a while either, but I don't know if you're even awake still. Jim's in like New Zealand time zone or something bad.
Oh wow.
All right, I saw his mic go on and off. Fine. All right, I'm going to claim victory for the Alliance here and walk away. All right, everyone, have a good evening or good morning or whatever. Bye-bye.
Thank you.